let's just go with this. We'll flow. I do want to bring up to those that have a chance to listen to this podcast, if you have a chance to check out TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. Also, over 100,000 very astute, intelligent people that have subscribed to the TradCatKnight YouTube channel. And one of the cool things about Eric is not only does he specialize in prophecy and have a big impact on the Catholic community, he also has an open mind and an open heart, I feel. So I've talked to people before that oftentimes they're so religious in their beliefs that they kind of, I guess you could say, in my opinion, have a bad impact on what Christianity should be about. You know, I mean, they kind of make somebody that is Christian oftentimes not look like they have the right intentions. And I appreciate the conversations we've had before. I know you're very passionate about your beliefs. The one video we did last time, which was several months ago, I remember in 1 hour, it just went crazy. It went viral. It got over 10,000 views in 1 hour. So a lot of people had a chance to reach that. You've got a whole bunch of people that just look specifically for TradCatKnight because you have so much good information. So let's talk about 2017, what you see coming. I mean, I'm in shock still that Trump won the presidency. I was really surprised to see that, but I kind of also look back at it now and say, wow, that makes sense. He followed the we want change approach. And if that's true and genuine, hey, we'll see. Hopefully there's going to be more jobs here at home and it's going to make a big impact on the economy, environment, etc. So we'll see what happens. But what do you see happening in 2017? And thanks a bunch for joining us, especially due to the fact that you've got a little bit of a bug you're trying to kick right now.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate coming on, Rex. And, maybe we could do this on a more regular basis. Appreciate what you're doing. Hit that subscribe button if you're out there. I know a lot of our listeners and followers check out your information. And yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do is cover the infiltration of the church, Catholic prophecy, end times. But as it relates to 2017, if you're talking about domestically here in this country, I was certainly surprised that Trump was quote unquote elected. I would be one of those quote unquote conspiratorial types who would fly by the whole, presidents are selected, not elected. Do I think that he is an outsider as being proposed by mainstream and alternative news? Absolutely not. But I would say with my following, it's kind of 50-50. There's traditional Catholics who are kind of cautiously optimistic, if you will, given the benefit of the doubt. Certainly he was the lesser of two evils. I mean, he was, he wasn't, Hillary Clinton, who,
but she
just
loves you.
Yeah. I mean, I forget what guest I had on recently, and she said, or he said that she was the epitome of just everything evil. And so at least on the surface level, Trump is trying to paint himself like a good guy. Do I really think he's an outsider? No. I've got a guest coming on, Dave Dionisi, who's pretty good. You should get him on your show, actually. He was high up in the military at one point, high up CEO of several different financial firms, but he kind of unmasked the infiltration of the Catholic Church. But he's got some information he wants to present here in a week or so, linking Trump to Scottish Freemasonry, which I have seen already, and I've had other guests like F. William Engdahl on, very respectable. Wayne Madsen linking him to the Jewish mafia, and somehow he made some money and getting into the real estate game. So, listen, folks. For me, 2017, I think they're going to stage Trump as a scapegoat, if you will, for the economic collapse, which I think we all see is coming. It's rather imminent now, and then you're going to see all these anti-Trump Soros-funded protesters come out of the woodworks, and you're just going to see a massive clash here. I mean, listen, in order for this, and we'll get into this a little bit, this Antichrist figure, Maitreya, to come onto the scene on every level, there has to be chaos, whether it's on the societal level, the economic level, the political level, just in every fashion, there has to be chaos, right? Out of chaos comes order, thus
right.
saith the world order. So my point is, they're very optimistic, with Trump getting in. And I see this on Twitter all the time. And like, there are going to be a lot of really disappointed people here, I think, by the end of this year. You already see Trump kind of putting into his cabinet a lot of neocons, a lot of, people connected with Goldman Sachs, and I think even the CFR. So it's like, is he the real thing? I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of sitting back, Rex, and just waiting for this whole thing to collapse. And it's first going to start with this economic collapse. Then I think it's going to get really brutal. And then probably after the fact, you'll see the globalists come out, and they'll probably say, well, hey, look, Trump tried to make it work. It didn't happen. There was an economic collapse. Guess what we need to do? Globalism is the way. I mean, there's a bunch of different paths that this could take. And I certainly don't want to go on a crusade against anyone who thinks he's the real deal. I don't lose any sleep over it, and you certainly shouldn't lose any sleep over what I have to say. I'm just saying, listen, when you follow the prophetic timeline, this isn't getting better. I mean, it's only going to get worse. And I just think he's being propped up, staged, and used to ultimately stage revolution. Which, by the way, revolution is basically the last imminent sign before the great chastisements occur on a Catholic prophetic timeline. Hopefully later we'll get specifically into the 3 days of darkness. So, speaking abroad now, we talk domestically, and feel free to cut in, Rex. Listen, I can talk, for hours.
Well, then, yeah, let me say one thing, because I'm glad you brought that up. I have often thought that before too. And can you think of a better way to get rid of the competition? Or if Trump wasn't supposed to make it in office, well, now that he's going into office, instead of making him a martyr, well, let's do something to, I'm thinking in the globalist mindset here for a second. Let's drop the ball on the market. Let's create a stock market crash. Let's create a housing crash, a bank holiday, or something that would taint his name. And then, like you said, they could say, see, you wanted to be all nationalist again or have a national type identity, and that just doesn't work anymore. You need to be plugged in with China and Indonesia and every other country in the world, because we're all in this together. And as much as I appreciate that, and yes, we are all in this together, there still needs to be that identity. And as far as a one world government, obviously, if you're the person in control of that one world government, well, what intentions do you have? And it seems like in the past, what does great power often lead to in this world in politics? It seems like the nastiest, most wicked person that'll do anything is going to be the one that gets very successful, oftentimes, not always, in politics. So it's a dog-eat-dog world, I guess you could say. So I certainly would like to see more jobs here at home. I would certainly like to see an identity here at home again. I did just a quick presentation the other day. You take stuff that's organic versus something that's not organic. The organic product has maybe a quarter of the amount of chemicals and products, or even less than that, yet it costs 2 to 3 times as much money. And it's funny because you build products overseas, you put more chemicals in it, you store it, you ship it back, it's worse on the environment, the product isn't as good by the time you get it, and usually who makes the most profit off of that? Well, the big stockholders and the people that control those businesses. It's certainly not the people that are working for pennies on the dollar, living in squalor and having a very dilapidated slave-like lifestyle. I mean, there's got to be other opportunities. So doing stuff here at home and organic and being a part of the change and not just giving all your power to these corporations, I think is going to be a big important factor if we do want to find a way to get out of the globalist pocket. So what you said, ladies and gentlemen, listen to what Eric just said. That makes a good point. Could Donald Trump be used, the idea of nationality, making America great again, could this be used as a psyop to take that hope away from the masses? I certainly hope not, but that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like I said, for those who follow TradCatKnight, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, as Rex had mentioned. Get to TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. Again, 15-plus articles going out to you on a daily basis. The Catholic Church before Vatican II, before this infiltration, if you will, of the Catholic Church, which, when you view the social justice program of what's been coming from the Vatican since the early 60s, and you line it up with Antichrist Maitreya has to say, it's exactly the same thing. It's all about legitimate redistribution of wealth. It's all about building this new city of man, the new Tower of Babel, where there are no borders anymore. I mean, all of this stuff is very, very intricate. It's planned out decades in advance. It's not like they just came up with these agendas, just a year or two ago. And this is what the Catholic Church has been warning about, this one world socialist republic. So this is where maybe Rex and I might disagree, or, myself and a lot of your audience might disagree. For us, America, I think at a certain point is going to have kind of like a Gilligan's Island moment, like where we're just left out on the island, like to really be in silence and solitude and say, okay, like, where do we go from here? Because there's going to be obviously massive civil war here. They'll probably promulgate a race war here. I mean, like every state versus each other, brother versus brother, when you read Catholic prophecy. And it's not just going to be here in America. Of course, it's going to happen in Europe. And Europe's going to get it far worse because they're going to get the whole Islamic invasion right there, which we kind of see already occurring. They want to invade Rome. They said by the year 2025, they basically want to have Rome, and so on and so forth. So for us, it's not this notion of religious liberty. This notion where every religion would have a public right. And I'm not sure, because I've done so many radio shows now, Rex, I'm not sure if we covered this point, but we're now seeing a problem with that, Rex, where we now have Satanists, right? And they're building all these Baphomet statues in Detroit and Oklahoma City and this or that. And I see Christians kind of, getting really mad about that. And I say to them, listen, under the pretext of religious liberty, they have a right to do that, right? I mean, don't Satanists have a public right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
So my point is that's a problem, right? So from a Catholic point of view, that's a heresy, by the way, in the Catholic Church, this notion of religious liberty. It's called Americanism. Same thing with separation of church and state. So what we say is, listen, it's the Catholic religion that we believe Christ founded. It's all or nothing. Like you're either with Christ or you're not with Christ. There's no like straddling the fence. So we would say that we would ultimately have to change this country, change some of the things in what have been principles by way of this country and change them. And religious liberty would have to be one of them. I mean, it's either Christ is going to rule us, or either we're going to be a Christian country, or eventually the Catholic Church warned over time through watered down doctrine and bad puppet rulers that we've been seeing, the past 200-300 years since the French Revolution. You're ultimately going to arrive at the Antichrist. And that's literally what we're going to see. So that's one of the things you asked me, what could happen in 2017? It's quite possible that this Maitreya character, who I believe is the Antichrist, your biblical Antichrist, and I believe we talked about him maybe for like 15 minutes or so in our last talk. And later we can talk about him more in detail, how he coincides with what Catholic tradition says specifically. But that's it. I'm not one of those persons, Rex, that says, okay, we need to return things to 1776. I would say let's return things to 32, 33 AD when Christ founded the Catholic Church through Pope St. Peter. We need to ultimately become Catholic. And this, of course, I always get this when I get into arguments with people. This doesn't mean that people don't have free will to choose against the Catholic religion. Sometimes I think, we're going to go out on some kind of crusade and burn down houses for, all Protestants and stuff like that. That's not at all the case. I'm just saying, as a public right written into the Constitution, either you're going to be a Catholic country or you're going to be a country as we are now, which is essentially a prototype for the New World Order, Rex. I mean, take a look around. I mean, we're kind of a hodgepodge mix of all kinds of people. That's exactly what they want. And so Americanism very much is kind of the model type for the New World Order. And as a matter of fact, it was the bishops, the American bishops, who brought this heresy over into Vatican II. And that's one of the reasons why, as traditional Catholics, we don't accept it, because before Vatican II, it was infallibly condemned. I know I digressed there a little bit. Why don't you jump in if you want to? Feel free to disagree with that, and then I can give you maybe a list of some things I think might happen in 2017.
Sure, and I appreciate your opinion. I certainly appreciate and value your beliefs. I myself, as you know, I'm very neutral on the subject of religion. I am agnostic, which just basically, for those that aren't necessarily familiar with the term agnostic, I just means I don't know. Do I believe in divine providence, a supreme, the ultimate being out there? Absolutely. Do I necessarily believe it's what is talked about in the Old Testament? No, I don't. And I get a lot of people that will attack me for that have certain religious beliefs. And hey, you have every right to do that. I'm just being honest. That's my belief. I don't think that I understand or am aware enough to know what God actually is. And I want to know. I absolutely want to know. I just don't feel that I do. So is that time going to happen? I certainly hope so. And if you're Catholic, or if you're Lutheran, or if you're atheist, I think that the most important thing, and even if you look at the teachings of Christ in the New Testament, he says, what's the most important commandment? Well, to treat your neighbor like yourself. And if somebody isn't at that spiritual level yet, to condemn them, I think, is the opposite of what Christ would want to do. But, he also says, like you brought up, a lot of you think I come here in peace, but I actually come here with a sword, and it's going to be mother against daughter, father against son. And then there's the path that's talked about, the less taken path. And I certainly think that there is, to get to that higher level, is certainly a less taken path. So I'm looking for it, man.
Yeah, the narrow road. And hey, listen, most people think, even with my own background, Rex, listen, I fell away from the church several times and became a very immoral person. Got addicted to sex and pornography. A lot of you might know my story already. So I didn't always believe everything the church believed. So what we would say is, on the objective level, we would disagree with you, but subjectively, we cannot condemn anyone. That's not our position. The church infallibly teaches that. And so, all we can do is continue to show from what the church has always said, people's errors in there. And I think over time, when people really process it and sit down and think about it, it makes sense. I mean, even when I just pointed up that whole argument against religious liberty, I've had a lot of people who didn't identify as Catholic say, yeah, you're right. It does make sense, because that's really the reality. I mean, as Christians, we believe that Christ is not only King of heaven, but he should be king here down on earth. Unfortunately, we know who truly rules down here. We know Lucifer rules down here. But the bottom line is we're trying to actively work for a restoration of a Catholic society. And that's basically what the consensus of Catholic prophecy is we're going to go through a great storm period, a tribulation. Many of you know it as the Great Tribulation. Then after this will be a period of peace, a shorter period of peace. I hope to get into that in a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, everyone's journey is different. And many of the Catholic saints first started out as agnostics or pagans, or living very immorally, such as St. Francis or St. Augustine. How about St. Justin the Martyr? I mean, as far as I can recall, he was a pagan beforehand. So my point is some of the greatest minds in the church didn't start out so hot, I guess, if you want to say. So the bottom line is yeah, we're here. We have to have open arms. We disagree on certain points, and we continue to pray. So in terms of 2017, some things we could be looking for, Rex, is obviously, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, with Planet X inbound, we're going to see an increased a lot of serious earth changes. I think we're going to begin to see more 7.0, 8.0 earthquake swarms that we're already beginning to see, just in these past few weeks. Solomon Islands, we had that swarm out there in the Cali, Nevada area, then out in the San Andreas area. I mean, mainstream media is putting the warning out there. That's how serious it is. When the mainstream media is tooting their horn on that, something must be really up. Now, from a Catholic point of view, I think it's quite possible. Again, we talked about this before. There's a growing number of us who hold that Francis is an anti-pope. He's not even the true pope, and that he will give way to this false prophet character. Benedict XVI, in my opinion, is the true pope. He's the long-awaited pope from Catholic prophecy to flee Rome after the economic collapse, after all these civil unrest, and essentially Italy's going to have a red revolution, Catholic prophecy says. And you'll see Benedict XVI flee through Europe. And then that's when the entire Catholic world, and really people who are not even Catholic, they're going to say, where is the Catholic Church? Because at that point, this false prophet nut job who shows up, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to recognize him as a pope. He's not even going to want to be called pope. And so this is where we have kind of the underground church being established. And this is what the early Catholic Church fathers warned of in the end times, that the vicar of Christ would be driven from Rome, and Rome would return to its ancient paganism, just like it did in the early times before Catholicism was established as the religion of Rome and ultimately set up shop there. So Pope to flee Rome is a possibility. Then we have this Antichrist Maitreya figure who might arrive after the economic collapse. That's the big thing we all got to really be waiting for, is this economic collapse, Rex. I mean, this is going to be pivotal because once this occurs, we of course know the unrest to follow after that. But then it's a more imminent sign of Antichrist Maitreya showing up onto the scene in what's called a day of declaration, where he's going to visibly be seen via international television. Again, this coincides with Scripture, where he'll be seen throughout the whole world in 1 hour, basically. And he's going to, quote unquote, telepathically speak to everyone in their own language and basically start promoting what we need to do and evolve as humanity, if you will. So, as Catholics, this isn't a good thing. We're not trying to evolve. These principles behind the New Age have been condemned by the church. And so I think we could see that. I truly do. And the economic collapse is going to be a major indicator of this. I'll get to a few more here if you want to jump in.
It seems as if many people have devolved, not evolved. I certainly think that most people are at a completely different level mentally. If you look at people used to read a lot more. They used to learn different languages. They learned how to actually build things. And now it's so compartmentalized. We all have cell phones, but where are all these cell phones made? They're all made in China, or at least for the most part, they're made in China. I don't know how to build a cell phone. I had a tough time fixing my Samsung phone. I had to take it apart and basically shave off the power button because it got stuck, and then I put it back together. And I just think that, and where am I going with this? Technologies and stuff like that. I wonder if they're going to use the technology as a way to do this Antichrist type setup you're talking about, to kind of get into people's minds, use a certain satellite setup, or do you think this is going to be an actual the fallen angel? What is the Antichrist to you? Because I'm looking up this character that you're talking about, that we've talked about before. I can't find a whole lot about him. I mean, I would think that the Antichrist would have tons of money, have connections to all the corporations, where he could literally just walk into GE or to Lockheed Martin or something like that and say, okay, let me see your parameters. Let me look at your schematics.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. But I think it's safe to say, he's in hiding until his time comes, until he arrives onto the scene. He has been somewhat visible. He says he does these interviews here and there. For those who are looking for his actual website, you can go to Google and type in Share International Maitreya and get to his website. I mean, you could spend hours there. I mean, I've been following this guy Rex now for 5 years. And again, from my knowledge and what the early church fathers say, when I'm going to look for an Antichrist figure, I can always rule out someone based upon what the consensus of the common opinion was of the early church fathers. And with this guy, you can't rule out anything. And I'm going to get into some of these characteristics here in a minute. But I specifically want to answer your question as it relates to the technology side of things. And we're headed towards a cashless society. I mean, I bring on economic guests on a monthly basis, whether it's Greg Manarino, whether it's Gerald Celente, or V, the Gorilla, the economist. I mean, we got them all on. They're all saying the economic collapse is imminent, but they all kind of agree that eventually we're going digital with the economy, and that it's not conspiratorial to think that these elites will have us hooked up to a supercomputer, which, as far as I can read, I can't recall if it's in Switzerland or somewhere in Europe, but it's literally called the Beast. And so the bottom line is, I talked about this briefly last time. When we look at what the early church fathers said about what the actual mark of the beast is, it's the actual Luciferian initiation in order to even get that chip. David Spangler, who was a high-ranking person in the UN. I forget his actual title, but he basically said no one will be able to enter into the New World Order and the New Age without this Luciferian initiation. So St. Hildegard called this Mark of the Beast the counterfeit baptism. So what you're going to see is, I just covered this. I've been covering the, okay, it's Belgium. I was just covering this in a few talks, the Ascended Masters, which basically are the Antichrist sidekick. To me, these are fallen angels in the flesh. And this is where we get really heavy, really deep. I've always said we're about to enter into the Twilight Zone. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But ultimately, what you're going to see happen is you're going to see the Catholic sacraments being removed. You're going to see mainstream quote-unquote Catholic churches being persecuted, obviously closed down, and they're going to set up those churches and Masonic temples for this Luciferian initiation. Now, if you think that's crazy talk, that comes from Maitreya's websites. I actually just found that out the other day in some of their apologetics, and I did it in my more recent video on the Ascended Masters. So they're very open and blunt as to what they're going to do once the New World Order takes over. So those who do not take this mark, whether you're Catholic or whatever you claim to be at that point, if you don't take this mark, they're going to come hunting for you. And that's where we get into the whole FEMA camp talk and why they're establishing guillotines and why they're trying to, form a global army, which in my opinion, the United Nations will be under Maitreya. He'll have the support. He'll have a global army at a certain point during the Great Tribulation, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, there's a lot to this. But if I can, we could start breaking down. Well, the last thing I want to say about 2017, we may very well see in Scripture, we have Comet Wormwood. For those of us who study Planet X, we do believe that if you're living on coastlines and you're in a major city, is basically a death sentence. I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm just trying to give you the consensus of Catholic prophecy. The Blessed Virgin Mary said to Blessed Anna Emmerich, there are few places in the world that during these times will be safe. Few. And again, I can only speak from a Catholic perspective. Those who hold special devotion to her will have special protection. I won't go into an hour-long evangelization talk on that.
Well, let me just jump in real quick,
Sure.
Because I think it's important. You brought up the FEMA camps, the Mark of the Beast. I've brought up a little bit before in the past on maybe one or two shows about how when I was just a kid, I was warned about the Mark of the Beast. And I'm 39 now. The first time I was warned, I was, I think, 13. And a friend of mine, his mom was with the FBI, and she got put on some kind of list because she was a whistleblower, essentially. And people that got put on this list, most of them disappeared. And then a few years later, I was warned about the Mark of the Beast by this guy. I used to hang out at this coffee shop and play a lot of chess. And then this one guy started coming around there and just basically warning us about the Mark of the Beast. And he said it's going to be UN troops rounding people up. He said that the cash, it's going to turn into a cashless society, basically a cashless society. There's still going to be some currencies, but they're going to be different colors and difficult to get. Most of the stuff's going to be electronic. There's going to be checkpoints. There's going to be UN troops rounding people up based upon, if you're a Christian, if you won't take the mark, then they'll get rid of you either on the spot, they'll take you out, or else you'll get put in these different FEMA camps. And I started talking to my parents and my friends about this stuff, and they thought I was just crazy. They're like, man, why is our kid talking to us about this kind of stuff? And you see all that, not all of it, but you see a lot of that stuff either being talked about or actually stuff like that is being implemented. There's enough bills and regulations right now in play that if they want to implement full-blown martial law, they can do it. I mean, there's plenty of bills out there. They don't need any more. It's like they rewrite these bills every year just to continue to fund the military-industrial complex. So there's definitely that possibility that it could happen at any time. And if you think about it, having UN troops round people up here at home that have English as a second language or maybe don't even speak English, it's going to be a lot easier for them to round us up because they don't care. They don't like us. They look at us like we're privileged, snot-nosed punks anyway, most of the time. So a lot of what you're saying, man, is spot on. And that Mark of the Beast, if they ever do fully implement that Mark of the Beast, talk about a system where there is absolutely no where to hide. I mean, it's already to the point to where we've already probably got nanotechnology implemented and implanted in us that they could probably track us anyway. But just going that extra level, it's almost like a spiritual thing where you're giving up more freedom and for the Borg, essentially. And I'm not even I'm agnostic, and I still see this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. In the end, what are they really trying to accomplish? It's all about control and manipulation. That's a sure hallmark sign that what they're doing is of the devils and of evil. As we just talked about, Rex, God gives you the free will to choose for or against him. So, I mean, I can't take that away. I mean, if God's not going to take that away, why would I take that away from another human being? Now, there needs to be proper order. People are going to see, listen, people are going to see in the year 2017, in the next year or two, why it is vital that we return to the Catholic religion and to return to a Catholic society, because there's going to be order nowhere. Right. That's why the Antichrist is called the man of lawlessness. That's why you're seeing the sodomite agenda, the transgender agenda. It's all across the board. They want complete chaos on every level. And you're going to have people who I would just identify as people of goodwill sitting back and saying, oh, my goodness. And they're going to want order in the world. And so they'll be looking for us, if you will. They'll be looking for what I just call the eagles, to basically come onto the scene and say, hey, listen, we've been doing this wrong for hundreds of years. Now we've got to make a return. We've got to make a restoration. What I would say, too, on top of what you said is I believe Vatican, the world governments, the infiltrated Vatican, infiltrated puppet governments, know Planet X is out there. They know it's more remotely close, and they're timing certain events. So based upon where it is, they can now get across the next agenda. And so that's why I say pay attention to, the earthquakes and the sinkholes and a lot of these things we're seeing visually now. I just reported the other day, New Zealand this past year had like 32 or 33,000 earthquakes, which is double from the the past 5 years or something along that. The bottom line is, with the whole birth pangs, kind of tying this in with prophecy while I'm thinking about it, Rex, is, the 3 days of darkness is the climactic event to essentially get rid of the Antichrist and all of the enemies of the Catholic Church in the world. Okay? Over 3 days, 3/4 of the world is going to perish in 3 days. That's after World War III. That's after the Great Culling and these epidemics, probably released via chemtrails. As many whistleblowers have talked about. I'm sure you probably covered that too. After all of this, chaos.
Which has been admitted now by the CIA director. It's called aerosol injections. This is literally, he did a press conference on it. It is not a conspiracy anymore, ladies and gentlemen. It is a conspiracy reality, but you just can't call it a chemtrail because you'll be considered a conspiracy theorist. But the CIA director did come out and say, yes, we do inject aerosols into the atmosphere. Sorry, just had to throw that in.
Yes, yeah, same thing with vaccines, too. They're now openly admitting there is a direct connection with autism. There's all kinds of loaded chemicals. I've had the top experts on, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, Dr. Paul Byrne. I mean, listen, the New World Order is the culture of death, folks. They want people to die. They want to control you. They do want what the Georgia Guidestones indicate. What is it, 500 million or something like that? I mean, they want to reduce. Yeah, they want to reduce the world's population. It's not conspiratorial. It fits right into their plans because we'll become easier to control. So the bottom line is, now what I've been teaching is you'd better be off the coastline. You better be out of major cities. You better be preparing. I'm not saying run around like a chicken without a head and build yourself take out $1 million loan and build yourself an underground bunker, because I don't think that's going to help those who are obstinately rejecting God or the Catholic Church either. That's just my personal opinion. But the bottom line is, you need to be preparing, both on a spiritual level and for what's about to transpire. 2017 is going to be far worse than 2016. Take a look at everything that's transpired in 2016. 2017 is the 100-year anniversary of Fatima, which is crucial. Ties in with Catholic prophecy. Many of us think that is a significant date wherein we just had in the church a supposed close of the quote-unquote year of mercy. And so we now are expecting God's justice to rain down upon the earth. We would just simply call that the biblical tribulation. That I'm sure most of your listeners are not Catholic, so they would just identify it as the tribulation. We kind of call it the chastisements or the great storm. I call it in my book that I'm writing. But the bottom line is, Rex, we need to be aware of all these things. And it's interesting to note, you kind of, I think you mentioned something earlier that kind of clicked something in my head. I recently had on Doug Hagman. You know who Hagman is? Hagman and Hagman Report?
I do, yeah. And it's interesting. I've never talked to them before, but I need to.
Yeah, try to get them on. I was kind of surprised, he was willing to come on my show. I've offered to go on his show. Maybe we're a little bit too much. Maybe we're a little too much for them. But, good guy. But, I found interesting. He had a connection with Kathleen Keating, who was a traditional Catholic writer back in, it was about a decade or so ago. Now, the significance of that is that he was relaying how he talked to her. And basically, he was aware of a lot of these things, and he's not Catholic, Third Secret of Fatima, infiltration of the church, things along that line. Well, Kathleen Keating was someone who blew the horn on this Maitreya character, right? She's got books. You can look her up right now. Kathleen Keating, I think her major book was called The Warning or something. Well, bottom line is she started tooting the horn on this character. Now, listen to this, because I don't think I've revealed this on a show or talked about it. Okay, she had an experience. She was out in the middle of nowhere, like Nebraska or something. And middle of the night, her dog starts barking. She goes to the back, the porch or whatever, and she sees this guy pacing, in her backyard. I mean, your immediate thing was, of course, to freak out, especially being a female. And so, she goes to open up the door and was like, can I help you? Is this person like on drugs? Like, what's the deal with them? And as soon as he kind of picked up his head and turned towards her, she immediately recognized who it was. And it was Maitreya. Okay, and this was after her doing radio show. She had her own radio show, by the way, very popular radio show, and she was on like Sean Hannity. I mean, she was on some pretty well-known shows, coast to coast. And bottom line with that is, after she immediately knew who it was. She freaked out. She tried to get her dog back inside real quick, and by the time she had turned around to close the door, gone in thin air. Okay, so with this Antichrist character, I mean, we're talking about very strange phenomena with him, like being able to manipulate time. And this was one of the things we were talking about with Jay Dwyer. Did you see that Doctor Strange movie that just recently came out? I'm not sure if you...
I haven't seen it yet, the Marvel film, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, well, in it, it perfectly is describing Maitreya and his ascended master. As a matter of fact, the main character, his name, or her name, he's kind of like a transgender type of person, as far as I can understand it. His name was the Ancient One. Okay, so this is what they call Maitreya, Ancient One, the World Teacher, the head master, the Maitreya Buddha, the Christ, and then around this main central figure were these quote unquote masters. That's literally what they called them, and that's exactly what Maitreya calls his kind of guru, his kind of clique, these ascended masters. Okay, and they're going to deceive people when they arrive onto the scene. And I don't know if I've covered this enough on your show, but I believe they're going to stage a good cop, bad cop situation, a good alien versus bad alien situation. I'm sure if you've covered Project Bluebeam and all these holographic images they're casting off into the sky, whether it's, floating fortresses, they've got the Blessed Virgin Mary,
right.
sightings in the sky. I mean, this is all fake
it's
science.
Superman! I can see him.
Well, I think what they're going to do is they're going to stage this whole Independence Day attack, and then guess who's going to come onto the scene and save the day? Maitreya and his superheroes, kind of like X-Men and Avengers. That's the whole propaganda behind those movies, folks. If you haven't figured that out, and you can see that in the underlying tones of these movies. There's always some kind of crisis, some kind of bad outer space force coming, and then these super evolved human beings come on the scene and save us. Well, it's very similar to what Maitreya is going to do when he shows up with his ascended masters. But the bottom line,
is he going to have his Iron Man suit on?
You know what? Honestly, that's his general name is Maitreya. I don't know specifically what his name's going to be. We can get into the false prophet, his sidekick, right? From the Book of Revelation, there's the false prophet, and then there's the Antichrist. They're two distinct people. It's his sidekick. Every Batman has to have his Robin. In my opinion, the false prophet's name, who's going to take over after anti-Pope Francis, his name is Yeshua ben Joseph. So this is where I caution everyone, and you got to be very, very careful. And this is why, as Catholics, I always revert back to the tradition of the church. We have to have the proper understanding of Israel. Israel was always interpreted to be the Catholic Church. Okay, it has nothing to do with this puppet state of Israel being established, which, from a Catholic perspective, we knew would house the Antichrist. And so this is another significant thing that we're seeing that we haven't talked about yet, Rex, is the rebuild of the Third Temple. And I cover this almost on a weekly basis, and I see so many people who identify as Christians get so giddy, and I don't know why. Do they not realize that this is where the Antichrist is going to sit? Okay, and so that's what we're being staged for. We're being staged for this one world government, one world religion, wherein, listen, this guy is going to break the mold. In my opinion, he'll be with us for 3.5 years, and he'll be the nice guy. He'll play the nice guy routine. Listen, I've got all the answers. He's a wonderful humanitarianist. He's going to solve the environmentalist problems. He's going to solve poverty. He's going to solve homelessness. He's going to have all these solutions, right? This is who we need. We need to follow this character now. Okay, well, the bottom line is after 3.5 years, we know he quits the good guy routine, and then it's off to the FEMA camps. And that's when, in my opinion, there's a distinct difference between when he's kind of with us, you know what I mean, and more people will see him visibly out and about, and then his actual reign, where he kind of brings down the hammer and says, okay, this is what you need to do in order to be in my world order, if you will. Okay, take that Luciferian initiation. It's kind of interesting, that Doctor Strange movie, they had a kind of mark of the beast symbol on their forehead. That's why you should get out there and check that movie out, because you're going to see all this propaganda right in it.
Did I bring up Childhood's End, the miniseries on the Sci-Fi Channel last time we talked?
No, I've never heard of it.
It sounds identical to the agenda of what you're referring to, and it's actually from a 1953 science fiction novel by Arthur C. Clarke. But the version of it that was on the Sci-Fi Channel, essentially what happens is these ETs come down to Earth. And when they come down to Earth, all of the technologies, the planes and everything, get grounded. But the planes don't all crash. They all just slowly float down and land. And people are like, what the heck's going on? And there's these ginormous motherships over the planet. And they essentially talk, in this megaphone, and everybody can hear them and see them on TV. They're like, well, we come down to Earth to bring you peace. And they don't really tell them their whole agenda. But then they start giving little little bits of technology. They get rid of all pain, all suffering, all disease, free energy. But then it gets even better. Then they finally show themselves to one person, like their spokesman, right? And they say, well, the reason we haven't shown ourselves to the entire planet is because we don't want them to get the wrong idea of us. So they show themselves, and they literally look like a bunch of Satans. They've got the horns, the hooved feet. You know, I mean, they're very iconic. If you think of the archetype of the devil or Satan, that's what you think of. But they're friendly and nice and peaceful. and so essentially, then they say, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to continue to help you guys out. And to make a long story short, and then I'll quit here. They basically, all the kids, after years of everything being wonderful, all the kids essentially get taken away. They float off into this other planet, which is the original planet of these ETs that look like devils, and their planet looks like a literal hell. It's like this volcanic planet. And then they say, okay, well, the only beings that are going to continue to live after and they blow up Earth. After they take away all the kids, they blow up Earth, and they leave all the adults there, and they say, oh, well, your soul won't continue, but your kid's soul might. But they usurp up all the kids, they take them to their hellish planet, and then Lucifer, the all-seeing eye, God, whatever, is this basically outline of a girl. So essentially, that's the entire story in a nutshell. They make everything great, then they kidnap your kids, and then they blow up your planet, and they say your soul is worthless. That's the sum up of the series.
Yeah,
welcome to the New World Order.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar, and it's out there. They've been putting that UFO alien agenda out there, whether it's ET or Independence Day. I just saw that most recent one again. When I watch movies, I don't watch for entertainment value. I'm always looking for predictive programming, this or that. And by the way, Independence Day, that second one was terrible. It was just trash. I mean, it was so bad. I couldn't even barely get through it. But nevertheless, that's one of the reasons why I actually thought that Clinton was going to get in, because I knew she was going to push the whole alien disclosure agenda. And who else is pushing it, folks? Listen, Freemason Francis, our buddy out there in the Vatican, who very much, in my opinion, is in on the game. And you read the New Age apologetics, they say he's a puppet of theirs. So real Catholics aren't duped by his erroneous teachings and where he's trying to lead things. But the bottom line is these ascended masters need to be the saviors of humanity. And again, that's why everything has to go to hell. So that's why, everyone's kind of, entering 2017, and everyone's kind of like, on the Trump train, and the world's going to get back on track. Folks, we ain't seen nothing yet. This is going to be beyond your imagination what you're going to see. Our Lord said what's about to transpire is going to be the worst period of human suffering the world has ever known. And we've gone through, if you're a Christian, okay, we know the Old Testament times, right? The flood, where only 8 people survived. It's going to be worse than that. Okay, now we're talking fire from heavens. We're talking about Planet X passing, the 3 days of darkness, and all of these just chastisements that are just so just unimaginable and incomprehensible, that our Lord said if he did not shorten the hours, that no one would survive. Not one person would survive. I don't want to burst the bubble of anyone who thinks, this is going to get better anytime soon. Now, it will get better eventually as we transition into what we call the era of peace, the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, this great, where everyone essentially turns Catholic. That's basically the bottom line. We will have a Catholic society on the other side of the storm. But look what Francis has been saying, Rex. I mean, he's saying, that he would baptize aliens. We're seeing these high-ranking Jesuits suggesting that, aliens are here. We even had Pope John the 23rd said he was a frequent communicant with aliens. Okay, now if you take a look at Aleister Crowley's writings of whatever that thing is, the Greys or whatever they call it. I mean, listen, folks, you're not talking about interplanetary thing. We're talking about devils, demons in the air, and that's what I'm hoping to get to. Maybe I could talk a little bit about Our Lady of La Salette, because there's a quote from her line, and again, this is another indication to me that Antichrist Maitreya is the one, because he says in his own apologetics that the Space Brothers or UFOs are paving his way. So we're dealing with, from a Catholic perspective, the demonic, and I'm trying to get to the quote. Listen, here it is. The demons of the air, together with the Antichrist, will work great wonders on the earth and in the air, and men will become ever more perverted. Yet God will take care of his faithful servants and men of goodwill, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one piece of it. So for us, now I don't want to discount anyone who may have seen something in the sky, because I'm sure you've covered this too on your website, that there's technology, 50 plus years in advance that our governments have. They know it's probably stored under, all these different underground bunkers that they have. But predominantly what we're talking about with the phenomenon in the skies, we're talking about demons in the air. We're talking about things from the other side. As Father Malachi Martin said of the third secret, and this is why I say we're about to enter the twilight zone, because you're basically going to have two worlds merge into one. You're going to see via this CERN program, in my opinion, a convergence of two worlds. I mean, you're going to see devils with your eyes. And I think just looking at the surface level, Rex, when you take a look at what we're seeing in the world and just all of the atrocities, just crazy news stories that are just beyond description. I was just reading a news article the other day, some kid, like 8-year-old kid, chopped off his mom's head and put it in the freezer or something like that. What I'm saying is more and more devils are being released from hell. They're occupying more souls. The world is going to get more and more dark, not only at a spiritual level, but then again, as I mentioned, we're arriving at that 3 days of darkness where literally the whole world goes dark for 3 days. The sun's not, you're not going to have no sunlight, nothing. And if you don't do certain things that the Blessed Virgin Mary said, it's a done deal. You won't survive it, no matter if you know it's coming or not. And hopefully we can get to that in a little bit too. I'll let you jump in.
Sure. I was just going to say, actually, I've got a friend in the Ozarks, myozarkhomestead.com. I went out and visited Jeff and the community out there. Nice
Jeff
people.
Harness?
Yeah, Jeff Harness.
Yeah, I had him on.
Real nice guy. And, if there is a way, if you know about something that's going to happen, and if you have the opportunity to prepare, I certainly think that is a good idea if you want to. And if you're not worried about it, or if you think that it's your time, and even if you're warned about it, hey, that's cool too. I'm certainly not trying to put fear in anybody's mind, yet I think that it's a good idea for me personally to have a security blanket and survival type insurance in case I do live through certain cataclysms, if they do take place, where I can, at least sustain, I can be comfortable, because there's a lot of things out there that people can do. They just choose not to. They'll say tomorrow, next week, next month. And one thing cool about Jeff and what they're doing out there in the Ozarks, at least, is they're putting together these tiny homes for next to nothing. I mean, their price points on them are super cheap. I watched that TBS show, Tiny Homes, Tiny Home Living or something like that, where this guy charged this gal $55,000 for a 123 square foot house with some willows underneath it, where you could get something in the Ozarks for a couple of grand, have some land, and then they also have organic food. They've got free range chickens. They've got stuff that isn't stuck in a farm, factory raised full of steroids and stuff. I think that's important too.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I had Jeff on too. We did a little 30-minute segment there, and yeah, I mean, there are going to be people who always fly under the banner, hey, listen, if it's my time to go, and there's a lot of Catholics who take that, that road, that perspective. Again, I would just say, from our perspective, that those who are close to the Blessed Virgin Mary, I think, are going to be protected. And there's one glaring story during the bombing of, I can't recall if it was Nagasaki or the other town, where these priests, about a dozen of them, were praying the rosary. They knew, the bomb was coming. I forget how they knew this. But essentially, they started praying the rosary, and when you take a look at a map, you'll notice that there's only one little building sitting there amidst, the miles and miles of rubbish, and it was their building. Okay, so we believe that through her intercession, and that's kind of the analogy that we use from a Catholic viewpoint, is that Our Lady is the Ark, the new Ark of the Covenant. So when you hide in her, so to speak, you will be protected. And we know how the Ark basically carried humanity through the flood of the old times. Well, what we're about to experience is not a flood. It's basically going to be all hell on earth, whether it's, fire from heaven, whether it's going to be 3 days of darkness. So, it's a spiritual protection, I guess you could say. So what I also wanted to get into, I guess, is, well, I mean, there's so many different things that we could get into here. We already talked about the rebuild of the third temple. I could draw some connections, if you will, of Maitreya, lining them up with Catholic tradition, just giving you some specifics as to why I think, and again, I can't go into all of them. I know this, we've got to kind of move along here, but, Maitreya, just in general, his name adds up to 666 in at least a half a dozen languages, including the original Greek. He's connected to the rebuild of the third temple, as I mentioned, called the New Jerusalem Project, and that is critical because the early church fathers said exactly that. He said that he will rebuild Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will basically become the capital of the world. Again, I mentioned that he'll be seen in 1 hour from a scriptural standpoint in what's called the Day of Declaration. And this is where we get into, I guess, a more conspiratorial topic, where we have all these phony cell towers being built. And I think this ties in with weapons of God systems, to where we will hear these voices in the air, just as the Blessed Virgin Mary said at La Salette. I mean, she literally talked about that men would hear voices in the air. And as I'm talking, I'm trying to find it. So she goes on to say right here, I'll try to get into this in detail here in a little bit. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. There will be bloody wars, famines, plagues, contagious diseases. There will be frightful showers of animals, thunders which will demolish cities, earthquakes which will engulf countries. Folks, we're seeing sinkholes right now that are, chewing up and swallowing up a home. Can you imagine when it engulfs a whole country? That's going to happen too with this pole shift we're going through as Planet X gets closer. Voices will be heard in the air. Men will beat their heads against the wall and will ask to die. Yet death will not constitute their torment. So I wanted to get into that. So that day of declaration, again, we know that the Antichrist would come first as a man of peace, and that's exactly what Maitreya will come as. Okay, he's not going to show up with two horns on his head saying, "Yep, I'm going to stamp you with the mark of the beast."
You will suffer for eternity if you take this.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, Lucifer, false light. He's deceiving people. And that's why he has to be the ultimate social justice warrior, right? I mean, if we could paint him as a wrestling figure, he had that ultimate warrior figure. I mean, he's the ultimate social justice warrior. I mean, that's, essentially, and that's why it's so tricky with Freemasonry. And again, the lower level Masons have no idea what's going on, but once you start moving up 32nd degree, 33rd degree, you know very much it's Luciferian. You could read Albert Pike's works on that to verify that. But the bottom line is, come first as a man of peace. Then we have this whole abomination of desolation situation where the early church fathers talked about how the Antichrist, or this is a reference to a statue or an image of the Antichrist. That was the common opinion of the early Catholic Church fathers. Well, you can type in right now, you can actually go to Google and type in TradCatKnight, abomination of desolation. You'll actually see my pictures on this. He has a statue or an image, which is popping up all over the world, not necessarily here in the West so far, but in the Middle East and Africa, predominantly down in the Nigeria area. I mean, I've had people who are connected because my blog is international. I have people, they said they're seeing these things. So ultimately what you're going to see is you're going to see that image or statue being put into mainstream quote unquote Catholic churches. They're going to remove the sacrifice. They're going to remove the Eucharist, just as the early church fathers warned, and they're going to set that up. And if you don't worship that image, which eventually will come to life, quote unquote, come to life, they're going to kill you dead on the spot. I mean, take a look at some of the Old Testament stories with Nebuchadnezzar, and it's eerily similar. So we have the abomination of desolation. So this is his statue. On their apologetics, we know, and most Christians should know this, that the Antichrist will basically facilitate a false peace treaty. He says that in his own writings. He's going to facilitate peace between Israel and the Arab countries. Okay? No joke. And then we already talked about the space brother UFO connection, the masters around him, which is just completely, fallen angels in the flesh. You got your demons working in the air with them. We know this from Catholic tradition as well. We already talked about how there needs to be just problems all across the board that the Antichrist has to solve, right? We already talked about problems of poverty, homelessness, ultimate humanitarianism. That's what he does. Go to his website, and you'll see that in his opening lines. His headers there. Performing signs behind the scenes. We know that he'll be a false deceiver, through Project Bluebeam and a lot of these geoengineering programs. I've always said this, Rex, and it's kind of funny. I had on, I think it was Alana Friedland. I'm sure you had her on. I said, Antichrist Maitreya is going to be the ultimate geoengineering wizard because they now have technology where they can modify weather. I mean, if they wanted to right now, they could literally just cause a famine in all of California, right?
Exactly.
Right. So now we got a famine going on in California. What do men have to do? Well, we need water so we can have, agriculture, back in California. Okay, well, who are you going to have to go to get that? You're going to have to worship Antichrist. It's kind of like Mad Max. Did you ever see that recent one, the Mad Max movie, where everyone had to go? Yeah, they had to go to him for the water, right? Well, so he's going to have all the resources at his fingertips. All he has to do is use these geoengineering programs, cause these different famines and say, well, listen, if you want to survive in this new world order, in this new age, then you got to bow down and worship me. And unfortunately, we know what most people are going to choose, at least from our perspective. Most people, by the way, are going to go along with the New Age program. About 2/3 of the world will go along with it, and about 1/3 will actually resist. Now, also, we have, besides the lying signs and wonders, and also I wanted to point out with these lying signs and wonders, be careful of this, okay? A lot of these supposed Blessed Virgin Mary sites, I would argue 95+% of what you're seeing coming through the mainstream, they're all false. And many of them, the Maitreya has claims, such as Medjugorje and a lot of these weeping statues that we're seeing, because they're using the Blessed Virgin Mary to formalize this one world religion. There's a lot of false prophets out there who are capitalizing, if you will, using Our Lady to basically stage this one world religion. So how I know whether something's true or not is I actually look at the doctrine. So when Our Lady comes out and says, all these other false religions are wonderful and great, guess what? That's not Our Lady. And again, I can only speak from a Catholic perspective on that. Disregard desire of women. Okay, this guy's single. He has no clear indication that he has any desire of women. Some have indicated maybe he'll be a sodomite. That is a potentiality there. We also know that he'll be an earthly king. And I couldn't figure this one out until about 3 months ago. And I kept digging and digging. And I'm like, man, this is a holdup for me because this guy has to be a king of some form, eventually, an earthly king. And I actually wrote to them and they said back, well, no, he's not coming to rule over you. And that's the whole perception, right? They want to think that Maitreya is just kind of one of us. Play the nice guy routine, as I said. But the reality of it is this character, he's an 8th descendant of a Sufi Islamic caliphate. So he not only will have connection to the Jews, he'll have connections to Islam as well. and I don't really have time to get into that. I've done blogs on that if you want to. I mean, I could provide further detail maybe in your description box of people who are interested in that.
Yeah, that's
And then
cool.
also, yeah, I dug up on that. And what's interesting too is, again, it's very one worldish. This one particular Sufi sect, SECT, they actively work with certain Jews and this or that. I mean, so it's totally setting up for that situation where he'll facilitate that peace in the Middle East, if you will. And then lastly, a more major sign, of course, is his sidekick, this false prophet character, who essentially, when he shows up onto the scene, he will always point to the Maitreya in all things, kind of like how Robin would to Batman, a sidekick. And he'll be the one, actually, in my opinion, who will formalize this one world religion. There are many out there who right now, in Protestant world and even some Catholic websites saying that Francis is the false prophet, and he's not. I kind of jokingly say this is going to get kind of interesting, because the early church fathers say that the false prophet is actually going to call down fire from heaven, much like the Old Testament true prophets did. So he'll deceive a lot of people on that level. Listen, I've said this, and I'm really not trying to be all that funny, but I am. Francis is lucky to tie his shoes, let alone call down fire from heaven. I mean, when I read what Francis is putting out there, it reads something like a Sunday morning comic. It's just, he gets more Looney Tunes on a daily basis. I don't know if you saw this in the past month or two. Did you know that Francis came out and said that communists make the best Christians?
That doesn't surprise me, but no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I mean, it just gets more and more bizarre, the things that come out of his mouth. And so, he's not the false prophet, folks. He's going to step to the side here soon and quote unquote resign. And that was kind of interesting. I don't know if have you had on Leo Zagami on your show?
No, it sounds like I need to.
Oh yeah, get with him. He's kind of like another Vatican insider. He's a Freemason. He's actually a Freemason. And again, I disagree with his notion that you could be a Freemason and a Christian. But anyway, on the surface level, good guy. I mean, we talked back and forth, but we both were unmasking this whole plot of inside information where certain cardinals denoted that it was the plan of Francis to step aside during his late visit in 2016. He and I started tooting the horn. He was on Alex Jones' show. I was kind of tooting the horn with Father Paul Kramer, my former spiritual director, who's saying the same thing because he knows a lot of inside information from the cardinals that he rubs shoulders with out in the Vatican. And so that plan went away, right? And then they said that he wouldn't even go to Argentina in 2017. He was scheduled. They pushed back the date to early 2017, and then they said he wasn't going to show at all. So, I mean, Leo and I kind of talked, and we're like, wow, I have no doubt that the Vatican is watching my work. I've been blocked by the semi-official publication of the Vatican. It's called the La Osservatore Romano. And they want nothing to do with me. They blocked me on Twitter. Some of the high-ranking prelates in the church, who I believe are just outright Freemasons, and they know what they're doing, they blocked me on Twitter. So I have no doubt that they're following what I'm saying. We're kind of tooting the horn. And this goes back to what I was saying about Kathleen Keating. I didn't even finish my point on that to show you how I bounce off the walls sometimes, and I apologize to your listeners. She fell off the map. Kathleen Keating was so startled by that whole instance of meeting Maitreya, she shut down her radio show. She quit writing books. I had someone write me privately. I'm not going to say where he said that she is, but it's in let's just say the southern portion. Well, I'll just leave that out. She had moved, so she was so frightened. So the bottom line is she came on record on Rent's radio and on Jeff's show and basically said, yeah, he is the one, and everything that I've studied indicate that this guy's the one. And basically, they're just holding him off to the side to the right time to kind of bring him onto the scene, and that will happen, of course, after the economic crisis. I'll let you jump in now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a lot of people that maybe aren't as religiously, that don't know as much about religion and scripture, especially within the Catholic faith, the
Sure.
Antichrist and Satan and Lucifer, are they all the same entity?
No, but basically with the Antichrist, essentially it's kind of a perfect possession type of scenario, I guess is the best way to put it. That he will, well, I don't have it in front of me prepared, but essentially they said that the Antichrist would come from a tribe of Dan, that he would be a Jew. He would be born of, I think some early fathers taught that it would actually be born of a nun, kind of indicating that there was some kind of connection with the church there. But ultimately, in my opinion, it's a perfect possession. But no, they're not all one and the same. I'm trying to think of some more apologetics that I could throw into that. But the bottom line is with the whole Maitreya situation is this: many people, the majority of people, are going to be deceived. And that's why I do what I do ahead of the storm, to warn people now. And hopefully we can get things shifted more in our direction, Rex. No matter what your backing is now, as you're starting to see these things, starting to unfold before your very eyes, you will remember these aspects that I'm talking about, to where hopefully you can now make adjustments. And that's one of the things that I try to preach and teach at my website, is we're all going to need to be eagles, because an eagle is very symbolic, and there's basically 7 principles to an eagle. And one of those things is to be able to adapt. Think about all the earth changes that are happening, economic collapse. I mean, you're going to have to be able to think on your feet, critically think, be able to process things, make good, quick decisions. For some of you, you're going to have to move, maybe through relationships, might go sour. You got to pay attention to the signs in your life to ultimately get where you need to be before, how should I say this? The storm hits us, because where you are in the world is where you're going to be, Rex. There's not going to be a whole lot of movement going on at a certain point. It's not like you're going to be able to just hop in a plane with the emerging police state and just say, hey, I'll go visit grandma over there in California. And then we have Planet X incoming, which is obviously going to be affecting the sun. We're talking about probably all of our communication systems going down. So, if you've got family that's, you're in New York and your family is in California, how are you going to communicate with them after that? So I always advocate, get with your family right now and start putting together a plan. And if you start to see some more of these underlying signs develop, then you need to take action. But I agree with you. I would say, it's kind of 50-50 split. Some people just don't care. They're just like, oh, I don't care. Okay, Antichrist is coming. Okay, if I die tomorrow, I die tomorrow. Well, okay. But I believe that God has ordained certain people to help people get through the storm, if you will. There will be a transitory period. Certain areas will be protected. I think the Ozarks, I think that's a relatively safe place to be honest with you. I'm out in the Ohio Valley, and we're pretty high up and away from, outside of the Ohio River. We're high up from that, but we'll be relatively protected here. So, yeah, a lot going on in that area. But Maitreya, Lucifer, Satan, that's all different. There's no, Maitreya isn't Lucifer himself. I'd advocate everyone check out Father Malachi Martin's talks on perfect possession and kind of how that works. That's really not my background, I guess. I don't dive too deep into that theologically, but the bottom line is you need to know and understand that, these nefarious forces are trying to work together with humanity, with these evil elitists, however you want to call it, to bring about this new world order. That's quite clear. And so these ascended masters, if I didn't mention in reading their apologetics, they're kind of spread out. The major ones are spread out all over the world. I had mentioned this on my last broadcast covering that. Is like Paris, Brussels, Moscow, I think DC, New York. Oh goodness, I can't. There's a few other ones, and those will basically be like kind of the hubs, kind of more central areas to where these ascended masters will work and try to help people evolve and get along. And again, from a Catholic perspective, it's all about how you perceive this, Rex. Listen, you probably have a good amount of your listeners who are into yoga and they're into New Age, and they think this is good stuff. Well, from a Catholic perspective, we believe Christ came, salvation comes through him and his church. You take this mark of the beast, you damned your soul. Okay, so you're dealing with different ideologies here. It all depends on how you're looking at the situation. So we believe very firmly, Rex, that this apostasy in the church is the more major signaling event that the Antichrist is about to arrive. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. It's called the Great Revolt, St. Paul called it. Well, when you take a look at Vatican II, that is what certain cardinals, such as Cardinal Sunens, called it after the fact. They called it a Great Revolt. They called it the French Revolution. That's ultimately what it is turning away from giving rights to God in the Catholic Church and giving it to man. So essentially, it's man basically enthroning himself. And this is why it only follows suit. This is why you're seeing so many groups come out now and say, I want equality. Just the other day, as funny as this sounds, I think it was on like RT.com. When that whole clown crisis came out and, all the scary clowns were here and there. They actually had like a get together and, these clowns wanted equality. Literally, they had a parade and these clowns were calling for, some kind of, I'm serious. And that's what I'm saying. Everyone is, raising their voice now. I want to write. I want to write, and we've got the sodomites saying that, the transgenders, this, and this. And it's all paving the way for the Maitreya, who is the man of lawlessness, who's steering everyone away from the true Christ and ultimately being put under his Luciferian rainbow umbrella, if you will. And those who studied the occult, and I'm sure you probably covered this enough, that rainbow that certainly can have positive connotations from a Catholic standpoint, representing rebirth, regeneration, if you will, after the storm. But to the occult, it's a whole different ball game.
It's funny you bring that up, because I did an interview just a few days ago with somebody that reached out to me, said he wanted to come on the show, and he talked about this black mass blood sacrifice ritual that he was a part of in Mexico with a very infamous sorcerer out there. And it was intense, man. I mean, he started going off about how there was a 10-foot statue of Lucifer, and then he put the goat on the altar, and he didn't know what to do, but then he felt bad at first, but then he's just like, okay, I'm just going to do it anyway. And he just started stabbing the goat. He ripped the heart out of the goat and some other stuff that I'm not even going to, if people want to go back and listen to that podcast, it's on leakproject.com, but it was just really intense. And it's interesting because right before we had a chance to talk today, I had an interview with a gal that was a part of a whole bunch of satanic rituals when she was growing up, and she was abused, and she was a part of like these military programs and stuff like that. And this is according to her testimony. I listened to her, and I'm pretty good at reading people, I think, being in cells for 20 years before I got into this, just that, some high-level cells where they teach you how to read people based on their eye movements, their body language, the tonality of their voice, the pauses, and everything else in between, and just the discernment. But she talked about some pretty heavy stuff, and she also talked about how she thinks that she saw Satan, like Satan himself, and the way that she described him is just... it's mind-blowing. Now, the thing that I find interesting is some people talk about Lucifer, the fallen angel, as being this just beautiful being that's just absolutely drop-dead, gorgeous model, supermodel, Fabio beyond for what most women would think or whatever. But then you've also heard the stories about how Lucifer comes in this form of just like this very dark, scary, wicked, giant horns on his head kind of stuff. So I guess it's kind of like that perception. If Lucifer is a fallen angel that has all that power and stuff, he could probably come in any form he wants to. So I don't know, but did you hear that one clip where people were singing in the Vatican? And okay, maybe there was something done in this clip to where it's a hoax, but I couldn't find it. But I didn't do too much work. I mean, I replayed it a few times, but they were singing to Lucifer essentially in the Vatican.
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and again, I'm not a particular expert in this area. That question was actually raised on my former spiritual director's page on Facebook, Father Kramer, and he handled it far more eloquent. And he holds several theological degrees. He taught in Rome. He very much is aware of this apostasy. But there is a connotation that does work where it relates to Lucifer. Meaning, when the early church actually sung those certain hymns, it didn't have the connotation that, like, hey, we were singing to Lucifer, the Lucifer that you're thinking of. And I can't really elaborate any more on that other than, I probably need to go back with him and for these interviews really, because that seems to be a common question that keeps coming up. We didn't get too necessarily hung up over that, but I do agree with you. We're seeing, and I think we talked about this last time, symbology even. There's certain Catholic symbols that are being robbed and counterfeited by either Freemasonry or just the occult in general. Like, for example, okay, I have a double-headed eagle on my website. Okay, I'm very much aware that 33rd degree Freemasons, they are Luciferians, have that. So I've literally been labeled a double agent now, all this kind of noise on the basis of that. However, where did they get it from? Well, they got it from Catholic heraldry, excuse me. The double-headed eagle stands for the church and state being unified. And so you'll often see this with a lot of the Catholic monarchies over there in Europe at the time, who certainly weren't Luciferians as much as some Protestants try to paint them out to be. The bottom line is there's good connotations and there's bad connotations with certain symbols. Like, for example, another one, just to give you two, the upside down cross. Well, a lot of people recognize that being synonymous with Satanism, right? The upside down cross. Well, actually, Peter, the first Catholic Pope that you read about in your Bible, he chose to be crucified upside down. Okay, so that does have a Catholic connotation as well. See what I'm saying? So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but there is kind of an orthodox understanding to what that is being relayed. Now, having said that, do I think that Francis and a decent amount of the Cardinals are literally in on the game and they're not working in our best interest? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that they are trying to prepare the way, pave the way for Antichrist, Maitreya, and these ascended masters, and that's why you're seeing all of these agendas being pushed. They have to talk about the aliens. They have to push the one world ecumenical aspect of it. That's why Francis recently was praising Luther, which you just don't do as a Catholic. So there's a lot of things. And then, of course, a more recent trend in the Catholic Church is the whole what we're seeing is we're seeing conservatives, quote unquote, conservative cardinals now rising up against Francis and basically saying, hey, listen, you basically need to get your act together based upon his last apostolic exhortation, which covered marriage and family. And so the conservatives are actually anticipating this formal schism in the church, a split, which I've been warning about for years and years. It's in Catholic prophecy, where Rome will dogmatically lose the faith, and that's an essential element of Our Lady of La Salette, 1846. She said, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. Okay, that was words of Our Lady. It's approved by the church, and this is what we are on the horizon of. Since Vatican II, there's a false and phony understanding of what it is to be Catholic. It's very social justice-y, impotent humanitarianism, Pope St. Pius X called it. So it hides behind this humanitarianist aspect. And it looks very lovely, right? We all have to be the new Mother Teresa's. But the bottom line from a Catholic perspective, Rex, is we're doctrine-first people. We believe that there is a certain set amount of doctrines that Christ passed along. And in order to please him, we have to follow that faith. So we say without the proper norm of faith, it's impossible to please God. That's in Scripture, okay? That's the Catholic faith to us. If you distance yourself from that, then you're displeasing God. On the objective level. Again, not subjectively judging anyone, just objectively saying, stating that on the surface level. And so, what can we say? We're seeing so many changes, and that's the essential element of the third secret of Fatima, for those who are not in the know. The actual words of Our Lady weren't revealed. They're being kept under wraps by the enemy inside the Vatican. They don't want people to obviously know that the Blessed Virgin Mary was warning about the changes at Vatican II and the new Mass, and ultimately the arrival of this formal schism and implementing this new world order, which, by the way, if you want to hear a timeline, Father Malachi Martin, in one of his last interviews in 1998, he came on to Coast with Art Bell, and Art Bell asked him point blank, what's the timeline on this? Give me a time frame, of the fruition of this third secret. And he said, listen, it's not 100 years away. It's not 50 years away. It's not 20 years away. Okay, so 19 years at least. Add that to 98. We're talking 2017. Okay, so that's why we think this is a very significant year. And there's some controversy around Father Malachi Martin. Some suggest he might have been a double agent, but as far as I can see, his testimony on the third secret was, he was on the inside. He knew he was a Jesuit, and he started whistleblowing on these things. So I have no doubt that he read it, and it seems like there was a date attached to it. So 2017 is going to be more than eventful. I'll let you jump in here in a second. I can probably go through, depending on how much time you want to go. I seem to be holding up pretty decently here. I could get into the message of La Salette, which is very apocalyptic. What I could do is I could cover what I call the big three: La Salette, Akita. Fatima you already know, so it's really covering these other two. But then there's a couple other visionaries. There's Marie Julie Jeheni, okay, and she forewarned of the apostasy in the Catholic Church and warned just how bad the priesthood would be, but she specifically warned about the 3 days of darkness. And I really want to get this across, because this is vital, because everyone is going to see this. If we all live normal lives and we don't, die of certain unforeseen circumstances, we're all going to go through this. Hopefully, we get through some of these other chastisements, whether it's the unrest and the great culling, the epidemics and things, but people are going to go through this. So I want to cover the 3 days of darkness, maybe a little bit of Blessed Sister Aiello. She was another stigmatist. Both of them were stigmatists, by the way. I can cover what that is exactly when we come back. Got an email alerting me to another major quake. Don't know if you saw that. 7.2. Fiji triggering a tsunami warning within 300-kilometer radius, which is pretty significant. It had aftershocks, about half a dozen of them that were significant in the 5.0 range. So we were just talking about the birth pangs, and here we have more 7.0 plus quakes. That will be the trend, ladies and gentlemen. 2017, it will only get worse. What I'd like to say is, I told you before, there's a good number of us. One of the trends that's happening now within the traditional Catholic world, and I said this from the get-go because I was literally the first, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but the first to say that Benedict XVI was the true pope and that Francis was an anti-pope, and that this split ultimately would occur. And this was years ago. And so since then, you've had prominent theologians such as my former spiritual director, come out and agree. Father Paul Kramer. There's been others. Louis Verrecchio, another notable traditional Catholic, just came out and agreed with us now. What I'm trying to say is there's a trend now of more and more people, getting on board with the notion that Benedict XVI is the true Pope. And this is, of course, key to figuring out where ultimately the Catholic Church is going to end, because where the papacy is going to end, because once this false prophet fluke shows up, that's obviously not going to be the Catholic Church when they set up this 5-step self-realization, self-humanizing evolution program in Rome. And Rome will eventually turn paganistic, as I mentioned. So that's not the Catholic Church, okay? Catholics can't be a part of that. So where does the church go? I suggest to you, ultimately, it's going to end up in Portugal, because there's an indication by Our Lady in the Third Secret where it says the dogma of faith will be preserved in Portugal. I suggest to you it's going to be in Fatima, right, where Our Lady has been warning all along from 1917 on. So these prophecies, which to me indicate that Benedict XVI is the true Pope. Okay, and what we must understand is that before he, quote unquote, supposedly resigned, and I don't want to be too technical with this because I know most of your listeners aren't going to grasp that. Not that they're dense or anything, but it really requires some theological training in this area. Is the notion that Benedict XVI truly did not resign. He actually just renunciated a certain portion of the Petrine office, which means basically the setup is, or the supposed setup is that Francis is the active Pope, and Benedict XVI is the contemplative Pope who's kind of hanging out in Castle Gandolfo, and he's doing his thing. That's why he still dresses up in white garb, if you will. I'm trying to speak in layman's terms now. The bottom line is you can't have two popes. This notion has been condemned by the church. Francis has even said, hinting that it's a wonderful, idea that you could have two popes. The church has always had two popes. That's not true. There's always been a true pope, and then what we call an anti-pope, or a false pope, an imposter pope. And during medieval times, we actually had situations where there were two anti-popes and a true pope. So if you think it's chaotic now, back in medieval times, it was a little bit more difficult. They didn't have internet like we did, and they were trying to figure out who the true pope was in the medieval times. So bottom line is we've had Benedict XVI, who actually just renunciated. He didn't actually really resign. He was coerced. This is known through the St. Gallian Mafia, led by Freemason Cardinal Martini, Cardinal Daniels, who's a complete New Age nut job. He supports sodomy and all this stuff. I mean, he's just a very bizarre individual. And the bottom line is this mafia, the St. Gallian Mafia, admitted publicly, this is not even a conspiracy, you don't have to dig for it. They admitted they forced him out so they could start getting across other areas that they wanted to get across. Obviously, we know the normalization of sodomy being one of them. So per canon law, a pope who is coerced out of his position, if you will, that quote-unquote resignation is invalid. Okay, you can't force a pope out. So the bottom line is we could really tackle this subject any which way, but the bottom line is Benedict XVI is still a pope. And maybe you don't know this to yourself and your listeners. Shortly before his quote-unquote resignation, there were assassination attempts on his life. People who don't believe me, go to Google right now, type in Pope Benedict XVI assassination attempts, and you should get some hits there. Right on that first page, you'll see cardinals talking about it. You remember how Pope John Paul I died mysteriously after 33 days? He was poisoned by this, satanic club, if you will, because he was about to expose the Vatican bank scandal. And basically, it seems like he was going to try to right the ship with Vatican II, although some would dispute that. So there were assassination attempts on his life. They wanted him out of there. We have, at the beginning of his pontificate, he actually has this quote, Rex. He says, "Pray for me that I might not flee for fear of the wolves." So he knew very early on. And listen, I'm no Benedict, I'm not on the Benedict XVI train, because he led to an awful lot of destruction in the church. But the bottom line is we would still hold him as the true pope. Now listen to this, St. Pius X prophecy. These are some prophecies concerning the end time fleeing pope. Pope St. Pius X said, "I saw one of my successors with the same name taking to flight over the bodies of his brethren." And that's key, because that ties in with the third secret of Fatima, the vision that was relayed. I think I talked about last time on your show. "He will take refuge in disguise somewhere, and after a short retirement, he will die from a cruel death. The present wickedness of the world is the only beginning of sorrows which must take place before the end of the world." So why is that significant? Pope St. Pius X's real name, Giuseppe Joseph in Italian. Pope Benedict XVI's name was Joseph Ratzinger, both of the same name. John Cleft of the Rock talks about how towards the end of the world, hostile mobs will rob the church. They will heap the most abuse upon the clergy. The clergy can't escape these persecutions. At that time, the Pope with his cardinals will have to flee Rome in tragic circumstances to a place where they will be unknown. The Pope will die a cruel death in his exile. The sufferings of the church will be greater than at any other previous time in her history. And then the message of Fatima, again, it's rather lengthy, so I can only speak to a portion of it. It goes and talks about how a bishop dressed in white, the impression was that it was the Holy Father, the Pope, where he was basically climbing over a steep mountain, climbing over people, arrows and soldiers were shooting at him. And basically, to us, this is an implication that it's going to be Benedict XVI on the run where he'll die. The most startling one probably is, well, actually, there's a few more. There's Helen Wallraff, which was another seer of the church in the 19th century, said that someday a pope will flee from Rome in the company of few cardinals, and they will come to Cologne, Germany. Guess where Benedict XVI, guess where Benedict is from.
Nye?
Yeah, exactly. Germany. So then we have Primo in the 5th century talking about the end times. There'll be basically a split in the church. This formal schism, which I'm talking about. One camp will be faithful to the fleeing pontiff, the other subject to the new government, which will be established in Rome. And again, this would mark the beginning of the end of time. But Blessed Anna Emmerich's is the one where it's just mind-blowing because she talks about this apostasy in the church in so much detail. But towards the end of her revelations, she talks about how she approached the Pope. And this is like she's having a mystical experience, like she's actually in the moment, if you will. I don't really even know how to describe it. It's not even a vision. Like she was there. And she says as she arrived to the Pope, he was very ill, could no longer walk. There were ecclesiastics in his inner circle who were looking very insincere and lacking in zeal. And that really is a key point because there's a famous video during one of the last days of Benedict XVI's reign where he's walking around shaking hands of other, cardinals in the church. And he'll go to put his hand out, Rex, and literally about half of them refuse a handshake with Benedict. I mean, he literally puts his hand out right in front of them. It's very clear in this video. You could look this up as well. It's in my.
Why do you think that is?
Because they know there's already a schism. There's already an invisible schism between what we would call the conservatives and the more liberal progressives. I mean, from our perspective, the conservatives aren't even good because they're still following Vatican II, but at least to some degree, I guess you could argue that they get it. The Cardinal Burkes of the world, the Bishop Schneiders, the Cardinal Sarahs, to some degree, they kind of get it, and they may just be waiting for this to just happen, and then they'll jump on board with what we're saying. Like, they don't want to, jump ahead too far, toot the horn ahead without this Francis doing what we think he might do and ultimately causing this formal schism. And I haven't even mentioned that. Did you see, and this was on mainstream news even, Francis literally came out and he said this. He literally said, I might be the one who goes down in history as splitting the Catholic Church. That's not conspiratorial talk. You can find on my website, other prominent websites. He literally said that to a close advisor. So, I mean, what do you do with someone who openly says that? So the bottom line, Blessed Anne Emmerich talks about how she got really close to the Pope. She said, you must not flee Rome at this point, because we have to remember after the economic collapse, after the civil unrest, and Italy's going to get it real bad. France, Britain, they'll get it bad too, but Italy will be getting it really bad. Basically, he shouldn't flee Rome. That, if he did, it would be utter chaos. Would leave so many, Catholics, to wonder, what's going to happen type of thing. And she just basically went on to say that this specific Pope was very worldly in many ways, attached to the earth, and that pretty much describes your quote unquote modern Catholic. They're too worldly from our perspective, and that's ultimately why they're being seduced by this humanitarianist religion. We have to remember, even from Scripture, a friend of the world is the enemy of God. So there's a very clear line between going out into the world and evangelizing, trying to draft people into the church, and then ultimately trying to converge with the world. And that's the problem with Vatican II, is basically they've converged with the modern world. They've adopted all of these errors, and now they're literally being embraced by this new religion. And I can say that quite adamantly, Rex, because even after Vatican II, we had Pope John Paul VI, who said in his summary of Vatican II, he basically equated Vatican II to the cult of man. Now, as Catholics, we've always been taught that we are the true cult of God, right? I can only speak from a Catholic perspective. We are the true cult of God. Well, I don't want to be any part of cult of man, which is it's a pure implication of Freemasonry. That is the sect of man, or the cult of man. And that came out of Pope Paul VI's mouth, who, by the way, very much seems to have been a sodomite as well and had some gay lovers in the Vatican. I won't bore you with the details on that. But nevertheless, we've had others, Blessed Maria Tiaggi, talking about how the Holy Father would be obliged to leave Rome. France will fall into a frightful anarchy. So over and over again, we have the ecstatic of Tours, another prominent seer in the church, 1800s. Revolution will break out in Italy almost at the same time in France. For some time, the church will be without a pope. Now, for my gathering of Catholic prophecy, you'll see Benedict XVI flee Rome. And the reason why I bring this up is because this may very well happen at the end of 2017. And I think a more telltale sign will be this kind of warning sign in the sky. I mean, we call it as Catholics the warning. It could be like a passing comet that I'm sure if you've covered Nostradamus, he talked about this, red dragon in the sky that would be seen in the sky for 7 days. But then he also talks about how a pope would flee and change countries. He would flee Rome and be killed. So you literally had Nostradamus backing Catholic prophecy here. It fits into the model. So I would say if we do see that sign in the sky, that's a pretty good indication that we're close to Benedict XVI fleeing. So, for those who think I'm a nut job for saying, basically we're more approaching the end of the world. We even had probably one of the holiest popes we've ever had, Pope St. Pius X, say the present wickedness of the world is only the beginning of sorrows which must take place before the end of the world. Pope St. Pius X, Pope Pius XII, another esteemed pope, went on to say, we believe that the present hour is a dread phase foretold by Christ. It seems that darkness is about to fall upon the whole world. Humanity is in the grip of a supreme crisis. And quite honestly, I don't even think you have to be Catholic to agree with that statement. The specific prophecies on a pope to flee Rome and tying them in as a direct connection to Pope Benedict XVI, who is the true pope. I mean, I've said this publicly. People who are clinging to Francis as the true pope, their narrative is going to fall by the wayside with what's about to happen because they don't see the things that we see from the prophetic standpoint, that their narrative is not going to hold once anti-Pope Francis steps to the side and basically helps. And this is a key thing I haven't brought up yet. In the New Age apologetics, they're quite clear that the false prophet will be aided by Francis. Okay, so you'll see him step to the side, quote unquote, resign again. It's not a true resignation from my point because he's not even the true pope. If you don't truly hold office, how can you resign from something that you truly don't hold to begin with? So he's not the true pope. And so anyway, he'll step to the side. He's a true anti-pope, and he'll aid this false prophet, Yeshua ben Joseph character, who is the sidekick to Antichrist Maitreya. So I kind of call it the unholy trinity, if you will, between Francis, this false prophet, and Antichrist Maitreya.
Let's jump into the next prophecy then. And then you said you wanted to discuss more about the 3 days of darkness.
Yeah, sure. Now, I encourage you all to look up this message. You can just type into Google "Message of La Salette" and read along. As I'm going to kind of read along. I'm going to kind of pick and choose here a little bit because it's rather lengthy, and I want to just get through some of the meat of it because it's basically a rewrite of the apocalypse, but it gets pretty specific, and it's it's not necessarily for the faint of heart, I guess you would say. Again, I'm not trying to fearmonger, but people have to understand this. I didn't mention this point yet. People always harp on this. When I was on Late Night in the Midlands with Michael Vera, he kind of brought up the point, why would God, chastise his people if he loved? Well, if you were a father and let's say, your home were right on the side of the highway, you had a young child, and, who kind of parked the car, he bolted out of the door, so to speak, and he's running towards the highway, so to speak, where all those, crazy cars are coming through the intersection. How do you think you are going to respond, in that situation? Are you going to be very pacifist, or are you going to be raising your voice and, get away from that highway? I mean,
of course.
Okay.
Right.
So my point is, there is that aspect of chastisement that's tied into love. If you're a father and you don't want to see your son go wayward, sometimes it's necessary to take off your belt and correct someone, right? And that's not being hateful, right, as the modern world would say and some crazy liberals would say. I mean, you're trying to reroute that person's heart and to help them understand that there are consequences to the choices that you're choosing. So right now, the consensus of Catholic prophecy indicates this. Most people have deviated from the Catholic faith, including people who identify even as Catholics, again, because they're basically unknowingly following another religion that's being identified as Catholic, and it is not. So again, this is where we get into, I have to be very careful when I'm trying to evangelize people in the Novus Ordo, Rex. Okay, you lay things out objectively speaking, you say you're wrong, you prove it, and then you leave out the subjective judgment of anyone. You leave that off to the side because I don't know how God's going to judge them in the end. I mean, these people really think that they're following Catholicism. In reality, they are not. So how does God judge that? Well, I don't know. I guess we're going to find out from our perspective. Again, I know there's a lot of non-Catholics listening in. So the bottom line is most of the world has turned away from the Catholic faith, and now there needs to be a gigantic rerouting of hearts. You see? So how does people get people's attention? Well, with everything that's about to transpire and what we would just simply call the tribulation, people will find God once again. People will find the truth again. People will come back ultimately to the Catholic Church. And again, I argue that Our Lady will be very instrumental in that. But even our Lord said, and this kind of ties in with the earth changes. I did a little blog on this, Rex. In Scripture, basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, our Lord said, basically, when my own no longer call me king, even the rocks will cry out. And again, I'm paraphrasing for those who are, reading the Scripture right now. And so, again, this ties back to religious liberty. Either we have Christ rule over us and the religion that he established, or eventually we're going to be ruled by the Antichrist or Sharia law or something. I mean, it's not going to be Christ. I mean, so there really is no middle ground, and that's ultimately, we feel, is the error of Protestantism. Like, they kind of just choose the middle ground. Like, well, we want Christ without the Catholic Church. Well, it don't work like that. It might work for 100 or so years, but eventually you're going to fall down through various revolutions into the arms of the Antichrist. So that's what we basically are seeing now, and the earth changes. The rocks are crying out. I mean, think of the whole world is just, it's just going to be mind-blowing, some of the earth changes that we will see even over this next year or two, I believe. We'll probably see significant earthquakes, 8, 9.0. It's just going to be pretty brutal. So I wanted to just preface that by saying that, because there is that, chastisement ties in with love. It's rerouting of the heart. Ultimately, God has to use the rod of correction to get people, because the ultimate end from our perspective is salvation, right? That's it. I mean, if you're in the presence of God for all eternity, then so what if you've got to suffer even for a few years, even for dozens of years, really. So the bottom line is that's why the tribulation is a complete period of suffering, really, is to people get acquainted with the proper norm of faith, we would say. So the Blessed Virgin Mary at La Salette went on to basically really give it to the priests, the modern priests of the time. She went on to say, priests, my son's ministers, priests by their evil life, by their irreverences and their impiety in celebrating holy mysteries, love of money, love of honor and pleasures, priests have become the sewers of impurity. Now, just as I'm saying that, I reported upon it just this day. Goodness, and I have to get to, as I'm talking about it, because I want to make sure I'm specific with this. There's one Catholic priest who literally was caught pimping. And I just posted on this today. Yeah, Catholic priest pimping. Italian 48-year-old allegedly hid pornographic home videos in covers bearing the names of popes, currently being investigated for organizing orgies in his rectory, apparently pimping out up to 15 lovers. Okay, this is supposedly the priesthood that Christ left behind. So right there, I mean, that's a direct connection with what we were just talking about. Priests call forth vengeance, he say, and vengeance is suspended over their heads. Woe to priests and to persons consecrated to God who by their infidelities and evil life are crucifying my sons anew. The sins of persons consecrated to God cry out to heaven and call for vengeance. And so we have to just know, obviously, from a Christian standpoint, that there must be vengeance on the account of sin, and obviously that's why Christ died for us. But if we no longer turn to Christ anymore, then we have to suffer. God will strike in an unparalleled manner. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. God will exhaust his anger. No one will be able to escape so many evils at once. And again, this is the Blessed Virgin Mary talking to these seers, one of which was Melanie Calavat, young children. So she typically appears to children, by the way, and this is approved by the church. This was in 1846. I should have mentioned that before I started. The heads, the leaders of the people of God, a.k.a. the Catholic Church, have neglected prayer and penance. The devil has darkened their minds. They've become like wandering stars, with the ancient devil will drag his tail into destruction. God will permit the ancient serpent to sow divisions amongst rulers. We're seeing that already, as I mentioned earlier, right? Cardinal versus cardinal, bishop versus bishop, these conservatives. And so I'm going to kind of pick and choose here now. She also talks about how the Pope during these end times must be leery of miracle workers because of all the astonishing wonders to take place in the earth and air. And again, this is how the false prophet is going to get so many people on his side, so to speak, and say, hey, no, we're the true religion. You need to be with us, and ultimately take this Luciferian age, because there's going to be an awful lot of signs and wonders. So by the year 1864, listen to this, Our Lady says that Lucifer, together with a number of devils, will be loosened from hell. 1864. Little by little, they will abolish the Catholic faith, and that even in persons consecrated to God, they will be so blinded that without a special grace, these persons will take on the spirit of these evil angels. A number of religious houses will lose the faith entirely, causing many souls to be damned. Again, I just referenced that one article. Bad books will be spread all over the earth. Spirit of darkness spread everywhere. A universal relaxation in everything concerning God will be present. They will have a great power over nature. That's pretty interesting detail right now. We just talked about the geoengineering aspect, right?
Right.
Okay, so Our Lady's pointing that out, that they will have control over nature. There will be churches to serve these bad spirits. People will be transported from one place to another by these evil spirits, even priests. Again, we were talking about this Maitreya character, working and moving through wormholes and stuff. I have no doubt that this type of stuff happens. As a matter of fact, on Maitreya's website, when he says he's talking to certain people in the UN and certain people in the Vatican, these people who are said to have talked to him, they literally witnessed him walking through walls and just vanishing through thin air. And that's what's in that Doctor Strange movie. That's why I wanted you to I was wondering if you saw it, because you'll see that technology or whatever, that them walking through wormholes and ending up on another side of the world and stuff like that. I have no doubt that stuff like that does take place currently as we're speaking. So there'll be extraordinary wonders in the world because the true Catholic faith has been extinguished from the world. Thus, a false light illuminates the world. Woe to the princes of the church who are occupied with piling up riches and riches, who are lording with pride. So our Lady's really giving it to priests, and those priests who are worldly. They're gathering up money and fame and honor and all that stuff. She said eventually civil governments will have all the same objective, that is to abolish every religious principle, and it will disappear to make way for materialism, atheism, spiritism, and all kinds of vices. And then she starts to get even, that's not even the worst of the worst. She goes on to say, a precursor to the Antichrist will draw his troops from many nations. Could that be an Erdogan type of character? He's kind of like a precursor. Obviously, from our perspective, Islam is a precursor to the Antichrist. So I would argue it's probably someone of his nature, kind of like a revived Ottoman Empire type of thing. And eventually it says, it goes on to say that he will seek to annihilate the cult of God. So here we have the Lady reinforcing the Catholic Church being the cult of God, not the cult of man, as Pope Paul VI called Vatican II. The earth will be struck with all kinds of plagues. There will be wars up to the last war, which will be waged by the 10 kings of the Antichrist, kings who have all common design. Before this happens, there will be sort of a false peace in the world, right? So we see this kind of false hippie pacifist, John Lennon, everyone needs to get together, your religion just as good as mine. Our Lady's warning of this false peace in the world, which by the way ties in with scripture, when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh. So that peace is not going to obviously be long lasting. People will only think to amuse themselves, right? Think about all the distractions here in the West between TV and all the gadgets and gadgets. People aren't concerned with their interior life and souls. They're more concerned about partying and clubbing. And I don't want to get too evangelistic on you, but the wicked will indulge in all kinds of sin. We have nature begs on the account of men, and she shudders with dread, awaiting what must happen to the crime-stained earth. This ties in with scripture where our Lord said men will die of fear and fright when they know certain things are about to take place. As Planet X is getting more and more remote, people are just going to start fainting and dying, knowing what's about to happen upon the earth. She goes on to say, tremble earth, and you who profess to serve Jesus Christ, yet interiorly adore yourselves. Tremble before God. You will be handed over to his enemy, because the holy places are now in a state of corruption. And we would argue that those would be your Vatican II places. She goes on to talk specifically about the Antichrist will be born of a Hebrew nun, a false virgin, who will communicate with the ancient serpent, master of impurity. His father will be a bishop. That's kind of interesting detail there. At birth, he will vomit blasphemies. He will have teeth when he's born, she said. He will utter terrifying cries. He will work wonders. By the age of 12, he will be just noted for kind of his false wisdom, I guess, she goes on to say. Now, this is where we get into the pole shift aspect, okay? Because Our Lady was indeed warning us of this pole shift that we're going through. The seasons will be changed. I don't know what the weather's out like by you, Rex. Within a few weeks ago.
It's like 80 degrees out here.
Yeah, it's like one day it was out here, it was 75 one day, and then the next day it was 25 and snowing. It was like, you're going to see, this is one of the more imminent signs, by the way, when we get into 3 days of darkness, that the 3 days of darkness is close. The just wacky, bizarre weather. You're seeing snow in Hawaii, we were reporting upon. You're seeing snow in the Saudi Arabia deserts. They don't even know what snow looks like. I've seen videos of it, and they're like, what in the world is this stuff, falling out of the sky? This is what we're talking about. Our Lady says the seasons will be changed. The earth will produce only bad fruits. The heavenly bodies will lose regularity of their movements. The moon eventually will only reflect a feverish red light. Water and fire will lead to convulsive motions. The earth sphere causing mountains, cities to be swallowed up. So just imagine turning on the TV and seeing one of your neighboring towns just swallowed up in a giant sinkhole. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. The demons of the air, together with the Antichrist, will work great wonders in the air. We covered this earlier. Now, I won't go into this specific part. Let's skip down. She says that the Catholic Church will be eclipsed. The world will be in consternation. Then the two witnesses arrive. Now, this is interesting. I'm not sure if you or your listeners are aware of this, but there are two characters from the Bible, Elijah and Enoch, who, per way of Catholic teaching, have never died. They've been taken somewhere else. I covered this yesterday. Some of the esteemed theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas argue they may be in outer space someplace, in an earthly paradise. Some argue someplace on the earth that has not yet been discovered, but they literally haven't died. Now they're coming back to preach with the power of God during the time of Antichrist. They will comfort men, and basically they basically oppose the Antichrist, and obviously it'll be more in the Middle East and Europe, not necessarily here in the West. She goes on to say, this is where it gets really, really great, and I think I covered this a little bit. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. There will be bloody wars, famines, plagues, contagious diseases. There will be frightful showers of animals. Thunders will demolish cities, earthquakes engulfing countries. Voices will be heard in the air. Men will beat their heads and call upon death, yet death will constitute their torment. Blood will flow on all sides. Who could overcome if God doesn't shorten the time of the trial? And the blood, tears, and prayers of the righteous, then God will relent. Elijah and Enoch will then be put to death, by the way. Pagan Rome, she says, will disappear. I'll say that again. Rome's going to disappear. Won't even be there. The fire of heaven will fall and consume 3 cities. The whole universe will be struck with terror. Many will allow themselves to be seduced because they didn't adore the true living Christ. Now, obviously, this is at the time when Antichrist Maitreya is going to be walking about, and the majority are going to be going with him. As I mentioned, the consensus of Catholic prophecy says that about 2/3 of the world or so will go to the bad side, if you will, the dark side, to use some Star Wars, whoever's into Star Wars analogy. It is time, she says. The sun is darkening. Only faith will survive these times. The time is at hand. The abyss is opening. Here's the king of kings of darkness. Here's the beast with his subjects, calling its savior of the world. In his pride, he will attempt to rise skyward to heaven, much like Christ ascended into heaven, right? The story. He will be stifled by the breath of St. Michael the archangel. He will fall back to earth, and for 3 days will be in constant change. There's your reference of La Salette in a direct connection with the 3 days of darkness. Now, during this time, the earth will open its fiery bosom, and he will be plunged forever with all of his followers into hell's eternal chasms. By the way, this is just basically a replay of the apocalypse, where it says the same thing, that the false prophet and the Antichrist and his followers are plunged into the lake of fire. Then she goes on to say, then water and fire will purify the earth, consume all the works of men's pride, then everything is renewed. God will then be served and glorified. So this is where we're talking about the restoration of the Catholic Church on the other side of the storm. Because, I was even confused with this a little bit, Rex, too. There are many out there, okay, the Antichrist comes, and this is where it's the second coming of Christ. No, that's actually not the reality. The Antichrist is going to come, and then there's going to be a period of time afterwards, which men will live. It's not like, okay, Antichrist comes, Jesus is coming out of the skies, and that's the end of the world. No, it doesn't happen like that. And honestly, I got this confused up until this past year when I started really digging into what the Church Fathers said on this, and then all these various apparitions, including La Salette, confirm this, that this what we call the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, which she talked about at Fatima, occurs after the Great Tribulation. So that's why I'm building up to a point here to where we're getting into the 3 days of darkness, because it's the climactic event of the chastisements of the Great Tribulation. And so that's I'll allow you to talk here for a minute, because I gotta catch my breath. I know I'm throwing a lot at your listeners, so maybe I'll get into Akita real briefly, and then we'll go into the 3 days of darkness.
Now, I'm looking at like a prophecy now, Revelation 12. A lot of people think it's going to be 9/23/2017 is when Revelation 12 takes place, based upon what is going on in the stars and the heavens, essentially. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So we're talking about the sign of Virgo. We believe as traditional Catholics that there's something there. I mean, there's not only that sign on 9/23/17, but we also have that total solar eclipse, which is going to precede it in the summer months sometime. I can't recall whether, I think it's August maybe. Total solar eclipse, which is another sign, if you will. Obviously, Revelation 12 is something that we as traditional Catholics truly tie into what we've been talking about with the message of Fatima. Okay, it's obviously an astronomical sign, but we believe it's an indication, once again, that this probably is perhaps where the Father now inflicts these chastisements and his wrath. When you read the consensus of what Our Lady has been revealing over the past 100 years, the only reason why Antichrist and all these chastisements haven't been happening is because she is constantly going before her Son and God the Father and saying, please no, more time, more mercy. You see what I'm saying? All this stuff should have happened already. There's been some saints in the church, such as St. Bridget of Sweden, that said that Antichrist would arrive by year 2000. Now, she was obviously wrong. That doesn't mean she was a false prophet or anything. It just means that, we can kind of alter things by what we can do on our end. More fasting, more prayer, more reading, more interior life, more turning away from the world. I mean, we can truly alter, events in that sense. And so that's what Our Lady was saying. Now, I'm trying to actually get to the actual quote which you were talking about. Where is that again? It's Revelation 12. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and a great sign appeared in the heaven, woman clothed with the sun. Protestants deny that, this is a reference to the Blessed Virgin Mary, but this is exactly how the Church Fathers taught. It also is a reference to the Catholic Church in general. So anytime when you see in Revelation a reference to a woman, it has a kind of dual meaning, either the Catholic Church or the Blessed Virgin Mary. So anyway, woman clothed with the sun, moon under her feet. Now, it's interesting to note about that, and again, I'm not trying to knock any of the religions which we would deem as false, but you always kind of notice in the Islamic religions there's kind of like a half moon type of thing. Well, the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Catholic religion is taught as being the full moon, because she is outside of Christ. She was perfect. She literally was perfect. Not that she didn't need a redeemer, but that's just a dogma and a doctrine of the church. I want to get too deep on your listeners there. But the bottom line is she was said to be the full moon. And that's kind of the analogy that I use. And we're entering into a dark night period where through our intercession, we'll kind of look into the stars at night and we'll see that full moon. It'll be through her protection. Another analogy that I use personally is as eagles, we kind of go into the great tree. We'll go into the tree of paradise. We'll hide in the Blessed Virgin Mary in her intercession, and she'll kind of carry us through. And there's another scripture there somewhere too where it talks about how the woman is fleeing from all of the persecution and heading into a more remote wilderness type of situation. That's basically what's going to happen with the church. We're going to go through kind of like a dark night of the soul experience, kind of a dark night of the church, where we're going to get reacquainted, with God and what He really expects of us during this time. That's really what it is. That's why, in part, God allows suffering. So, yeah, in short, astronomical sign. We do believe that there's something to this. You'll get debate amongst traditional Catholics as to what that actually means. I've seen other traditionalists put out some recent videos. I think some of it's halfway decent information, but I think that, quite honestly, at the back end of 2017, just all hell could really start breaking loose. We could have the economic collapse happening. We could have all this civil unrest throughout the world. When does Maitreya show up onto the scene? Which for me would mark the tribulation period. Once he shows up on the day of declaration, that's when you can really get your calendar out and say, okay, now we're going through it, basically. This is when he publicly will come onto the scene. Will that happen? September 23rd, 2017? I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. The New Age and their apologetics, after all of this chaos and madness is happening, they have a star sign. Okay, you remember the story in the Old Testament when the three magi saw the star in the sky and they went to go follow after Christ, right? I mean, we're finishing up on Christmas here. Everyone should pretty much know that story even if you're not Christian. Okay, well, this is going to happen similarly with the New Age version of the Christ, right, Maitreya, and there will be a star sign in the sky. Once you see this star sign, then you know he's about to appear onto the scene. So after all this chaos is happening and mankind is, we need help, we need direction. That's when people will see the star sign, and it's going to be in December, in my research. Perfectly counterfeiting, again, the trueness of what we say in the Catholic religion with, the story of the three magi. So that's a great point. I'm glad you pointed that out with this astronomical sign. Certainly something to consider. Some have suggested, maybe at a certain point we'll see Planet X. I personally don't think so, but let's see what happens with that. Again, with the 3 days of darkness, that's going to be the climactic event of the more near Paris of Planet X. So I still think we have some time to go with that. But that's just my opinion. I'm certainly not infallible in that fashion.
Sure.
And so, kind of transitioning here, and I'll just let you know if I get any more indication of a direction on that topic. Listen, if I'm not an expert in a certain area, I'm going to tell you. With that, I think you could argue any different number of points, Rex. So, listen, I leave it up to some other traditionalists who maybe have studied it a little bit more, but I think there's something to it. I mean, don't get me wrong. And someone else was on my show pointing out how I guess there's predictive programming in a lot of TV shows and entertainment industry of this 92317. I don't know if you've got anything to add personally, or any of your guests saying that. I haven't personally seen it, but they're saying that there's now predictive programming targeting this 92317 date. I don't know. I'm going to have to do some research later on in the matter, but
I haven't seen any specific TV shows, but I have seen for the past, let's say, 7 years on the internet. It's every year, September 23rd is supposed to be the date that something big is supposed to happen. Now, if you look at the star charts, though, 9/23/2017, you can say, yeah, I see the parallels of where the stars and planets are to the prophecy Revelation 12 in the Bible, in Revelation. Now, does that mean that the world's going to end? Does that mean the pole's going to shift? Does that mean we're going to see Planet X? No. Although I do see where they get that parallel. Now, I think that 2017, though, this is a fascinating year. I mean, already I can tell we're into it just a couple of days, and based on the end of 2016, there's certainly it's going to be an incredible ride, and hopefully, like you said, we can just kind of have that mindset of good thoughts, do good things, be prepared as best as we can, but do not fret constantly. Do not feed the beast by constantly worrying about it. Just be prepared and be aware of things. And if you see somebody that looks like they're having a bad day, smile at them. Just smile at somebody, and maybe they'll be happy. Like, oh yeah, that guy's happy. I'm going to smile at the next person because they're having a bad day. Or if you're in line waiting for a coffee or something like that, buy the person behind you a cup of coffee. I don't know. I'm just thinking of silly stuff that we can do to really just make little impacts on somebody's day. If something in your gut's telling you to say something to somebody or to help somebody out, do it.
Yeah, well, we call that works of mercy, acts of charity in the Catholic Church. Certainly, I mean, we have to be doing this as Catholics, as Christians, to verify our faith. And again, when I say all this stuff, and I find it easier to actually convert people who are not following Vatican II, meaning your non-denominational Protestants or people who just identify themselves as Christians, to the church. When you have a sit-down one-on-one talk, you help clear up doctrinal issues, show where it was taught in the early church. But the bottom line, if you're being a jerk to them and you're not, being a Christian, I mean, who in the world would want to be Catholic? And so, that's it. I mean, you got to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk. And so, yeah, definitely interesting times. Akita is another message. Very briefly, it's not nearly as long as La Salette. It's actually, this one particular message. It's the third message of Akita. Now, this was a Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to a certain nun out in Akita, Japan, and basically was giving a very stern warning again. And again, for brevity's sake, we're just going to get right to the third message. And by the way, Dave Dionisi, who I mentioned earlier in the show, he actually went to hunt down this particular sister. And what he told me was kind of striking. They're apparently trying to keep her under wraps. The diocese, they don't want her talking much about what I'm about to say right now. But apparently he did hunt her down and find her and talk to her very briefly. And she's told him privately to keep this message going. And so this ties in ultimately, in my opinion, with the 3 days of darkness. Again, it's kind of the heights of the great chastisements, we call it. This was on October 13th, the anniversary day of the last apparition of the Virgin Mary to the three children of Fatima. And Mary gave this message to Sister Agnes. This has been approved by the Church 1973, by the way. If men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment upon all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the deluge, such as one will never have seen before. Fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a greater part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor the faithful. The survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. The only arms which will remain for you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. Each day recite the prayers of the rosary. Again, a constant reiteration of the rosary and devotion to the Immaculate Heart in all of these messages. The work of the devil will infiltrate even into the church in such a way you'll see cardinals opposing cardinals. We're already seeing that. Bishops against bishops. And just imagine what happens after the formal schism on a local level with your own bishops. You're going to have bishops going at it with one another. They won't know what to think. I mean, it's about to get even nuttier than what it is already with the Catholic Church. So priests who venerate me will be scorned. Churches and altars will be sacked. Remember, I told you the Antichrist will eventually abolish the Catholic Mass, which to us is the literal presence of our Lord. And that's ultimately what I want to do. And there's a quote by a saint in the church, Padre Pio, who said, you take away the Catholic Mass and the whole world will go dark. Make that connection now between the 3 days of darkness. It's very clear that during that time, I mean, you virtually won't be able to find a Catholic Mass being served. So the church will be full of compromise and demons pressing many priests to leave the service of God. Bottom line with this one is it ties in with Revelation 8:7, wherein we have this fire falling with heaven, being intermingled with blood, and basically wiping out a good portion of humanity. I think it's actually 1/3 to be specific in that scripture. I'm just going off the top of my head, but it's interesting to note that Blessed Sister Aiello, who in Italy was a stigmatist, right? Stigmatist is one who actually bears the wounds of Christ. It has to go through a very serious and elaborate process in which the church must rule out any natural, forgery, basically, and they'll bring in all kinds of outside, medics and science, and basically they have to deem it as being supernatural. Well, hers was supernatural. And there's actually some pretty compelling pictures of her, basically laying in a pool of blood, with the wounds, from the crown that Christ had on his forehead and the nails in her hands. Very, very compelling pictures. But the bottom line with her is she basically said the same. She said the clouds with lightning, flashes of fire and sky, a tempest of fire shall fall upon the world. This terrible scourge never seen before in the history of humanity will last, guess how long? 70 hours, about 3 days, 72 hours. Godless persons will be crushed and wiped out. Many will be lost because they remain in the obstinacy of their sin. Now, as it relates to this fire, that was like in the early 1950s. She goes on to completely get even more specific. Men do not amend their ways. A terrifying scourge of fire will come down from heaven upon all the nations of the world, and men will be punished according to debts contracted by divine justice. There will be frightful moments for all, because heaven will be joined with earth, and all the ungodly people will be destroyed. Some nations purified, while others will completely disappear entirely. And I'm trying to get even more specific here. She talks about how Russia will burn. Okay, so Russia's a very key country for the restoration of the Catholic Church. In the Message of Fatima, there's a certain consecration that our Blessed Virgin Mary called for, which hasn't been done. Basically said, once it's done, then the world will basically come back to a truly Catholic Christian society. So the major country to keep your eye on, and it shouldn't be too much of a no-brainer at this point. I've always said this, we in the West, we become more liberal. Russia's now becoming more and more conservative. I know a lot of people who right now, if they could, they would move to Russia. And that's pretty kind of frightening to say, considering we've been through the Cold War and all that.
There's an article that came out just recently that said America and Russia have flipped.
Yeah, was that James Perloff? I just had him on my show, and he just sent me that email today. I think that was him who it was James. He messaged me this morning with it. I'm going to try to get it up on the website. I haven't looked at it yet, but James is good. But yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, so they're vital. And again, I'm not trying to paint Putin as the savior of the world. I think the jury's kind of still out on him. I think most traditional Catholics see that, at least on the surface level, kind of like Trump, at least he's moving things in the right direction. The bottom line is, what, in my opinion, will ultimately kick Russia into just full gear, like, hey, we're coming back to the Catholic Church, and that's ultimately what will happen after this consecration, is this particular chastisement, because the Blessed Virgin Mary says, see how Russia will burn before my eyes, the extended of an immense field covered with flames and smoke, in which souls were submerged in a sea of fire. Grasp that in your mind for a second. I mean, it's kind of like, Russia, portions of Russia will literally be in a sea of fire, not just, that's why I don't think it's going to be meteors. You know what I mean? Like when Planet X comes in, we have this kind of timeline of meteors coming in. I mean, it's got to be something where literally Russia's kind of blanketed in fire, a portion of it at least, a sea of fire, she's saying. So, and this fire, the Blessed Virgin Mary said, is not from that which will fall from the hands of man. So that excludes nuclear warfare. But it will be hurled directly from the angels at the time of the great chastisement that will come upon the earth. And then again, she goes on to talk about how the scourge is very near, keep spreading this message, it's not that far off, and so on and so forth. I mean, she has a series of talks all the way from the early 50s to like the mid 60s, for brevity's sake. I obviously can't go through all of it. I just wanted to draw that connection between, the fire falling down from Akita and then this particular seer who was approved in the church coming out of Italy, who said the same exact thing in stark details. And by the way, Blessed Sister Aiello also talks about how Rome will be destroyed as well. Over and over again, we see this destruction of Rome, even in Scripture, the city of Seven Hills, which the early church fathers referenced as being Rome or Jerusalem, or both. Common opinion actually was that it was a reference to both. So we talked about that. Where are we at now? I guess if we want, we can kind of start to conclude this. But we did a lot of good stuff today. I think we've got over 2 hours so far.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
Yeah, this is great. I thought about it today. I was like, you know what? I really want to kind of lay it on you today. What you said to get go with prophecy. And listen, there are hundreds of prophecies. I'm only really tackling the top three, and then giving you, two or three more major seers in the church. Blessed Anna Emmerich, Blessed Sister Aiello, and Marie Julie Jeheni. I encourage you all to really read the writings of Marie Julie Jeheni, because she not only points things out what's going on in the Catholic Church, she talks about all of everything, all the civil unrest oncoming. Marie Julie Jeheni held the stigmata the longest in church history. She held it for over 60 years. She bled the wounds of Christ. Now get this. I mean, in my opinion, people ask me, of any person in the past, who would you really like to meet, saint or otherwise in the church? And she's the one. Very holy woman. Absolutely amazing woman. She was close to two popes, Pope St. Pius X, who was the famous pope, if you will, which kind of unmasked the one world religion, which he saw the movement first started in France, by the way. It was called the Silionist movement. And but nevertheless, Marie Julie, at one point, she was asked by God to be a victim soul during the war of her time. And I honestly, I want to say it's World War I, because her writings were in the early 1900s. So she took that, up, and she became a victim soul, if you will, and basically suffered an awful lot. She became deaf, dumb, and blind so that other souls can convert. So when we're talking about true charity, there you go. She basically gave up her body so that basically Christ could kind of suffer it out in her body so that other souls could convert, to the church and to the Catholic faith. And she was willing to do that. She also performed, get this is documented by medical science, okay? Again, it's a rather rigorous process when you're dealing with some of these mystical experiences. But she once performed a 5-year fast. I'm going to say that again. 5 years without food or water. She survived on the Catholic Eucharist. So when we're talking about having life in you, and our Lord saying that unless you eat of my flesh, you have no life in you. This is what we mean when Catholics go to the Catholic Mass and we literally eat of our body and blood. She literally survived 5 years without eating or drinking anything. She didn't go to the bathroom. I'm not trying to be gross, but she didn't go to the bathroom one way or the other. Recorded by medical science, and they were just completely floored. So, long story short, the reason why I say all this is because she's a very holy woman, and she's to be taken very seriously because she was very descriptive in some of the chastisements in which she talked about. And she's the most notable Catholic mystic in regards to the 3 days of darkness. And I want to say this, there's a lot of quote-unquote Christians butchering this traditional Catholic prophecy. I mean, this comes from the Catholic Church, this prophecy. And I just see a lot of people who, they're not following what these mystics said, and they're butchering it. I was on Before It's News the other day, and I saw, NASA saying there's 6 days of darkness. Everyone, get ready. And it's like, no, I mean, these people have no time frame for when this is about to happen. This is going to happen at the end of the tribulation period, folks, at the heights of when Antichrist Maitreya is more abroad. I mean, so it's not like the 3 days of darkness is going to be here in the next year or two. It's going to get worse. The earth changes and things we're seeing. So anyway, Marie Julie announced the 3 days of darkness, and this is where we start getting connected with the CERN program, because as we talked about a little bit earlier, I firmly believe that they do now have the capability of kind of converging both worlds. It's basically an opening of the gates of hell. And what is it, Revelation 9:1? I've had on Anthony Patch, I'm sure you had too, and we agreed on this. And St. Jerome in the Dewey Reims actually talked about this specifically, being demons released. So we can take that as a literal interpretation of that. I believe it's Revelation 9:1. Someone can correct me. I don't have all this stuff in front of me. I'm going off the top of my head. And the reason why that's important is because this is going to converge with the 3 days of darkness. And this is where we can get into talk about Nephilim and giants. Listen, I'm even open to that. I think it's quite possible that during these 3 days of darkness, these giants and freaks and every devilish thing are going to be let loose. And there's a reason why Our Lady said, you'd better be inside doing certain things or you're done. She goes on to say, the infernal powers will be loosed and execute the enemies of God and the church. This crisis will suddenly explode. The punishments will be shared by all, will succeed one another without interruption. That was 1884. Now get this, the 3 days of darkness will be on a Catholic feast day. It's it's a certain feast day in the Catholic Church on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. Very specific. No, I shouldn't say. It's going to be on those 3 days, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Hopefully that came out right. Now, the reason why that's important is because that's when our Lord died. So in emulation of his passion, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, rose again on Sunday, Easter Sunday. Okay, see the kind of emulation of that. So she goes on to say, it will be 3 days less 1 night. Again, tying back in with Blessed Sister Ayala, who said about 70 hours. The earth will be covered in darkness. All hell will be loosed on earth. Thunder and lightning will cause those who have no faith or trust in my power to die of fear. The thunder and lightning alone, folks, think about, I mean, everyone's been through probably a pretty nasty thunder and lightning storm. I mean, it probably startles you a little bit. Could you imagine just on the level of the thunder and lightning being so bad that people will die? That's pretty intense. I mean, put aside all
It is.
Okay, so this is how bad, it's going to be as Planet X is getting closer. During the 3 days of terrifying darkness, no windows must be opened because no one will be able to see the earth and its terrible color it will have in those days of punishment without dying at once. So here we have two references. One, just by the mere notion of the thunder of lightning will cause people to die. Two, if you want to be curious, a curious cat and look out your window, just by looking at the sight of the sky, you're going to die. What we just say in general, Rex, is this: those who are not in what we call a state of grace are going to perish, a state of sanctifying grace. And this is where we get into whole talk about, staying away from mortal sins, and this gets into whole theological talk. I won't bore your audience on that, but just need to know that in general, and this is where, again, listen, I come in encounter with a lot of people who aren't Catholic, and they say, hey, listen, I know this is coming, I know this, and this. It doesn't matter. This is a spiritual chastisement, okay? If you're not in a state of grace, it doesn't matter where you are. Even in your house, you will perish. And so continuing on here, the sky will be on fire, the earth will split. Now, remember, we were just covered La Salette, how the abyss would open. The earth will literally split, and open. Okay, so that ties into a theological question, Rex, of where hell actually is. There's basically, there's no infallible teaching on the church, but basically it's below us, somewhere in the middle of earth, purgatory being on top of it, which is kind of a period of holding, if you will, for purification before souls, ultimately can be released into heaven. And that can be found in your original Bible. In Maccabees somewhere, there's like 2 Maccabees something, where it talks about praying for the dead and the notion of purgatory for those who are Protestant. So anyway, continuing along, the earth will split. During these 3 days of darkness, let the blessed candle be lit everywhere. There'll be no light will be able to shine. Okay? Obviously, at that point, I think there'll be no electricity. And even at that point, you're going to want to unplug all of your electrical outlets. Don't ask me how this works, but I do believe these kind of demonic entities can move through these kind of like, through electricity to ultimately get into your house. I'm no expert in that area. I would just say at that point, you need to unplug everything in your house, unplug it. You have to cover up all your windows. You won't be able, don't look outside, and you'll need to get blessed candles blessed by a traditional Catholic priest. Remember I talked about you have to do certain things. Those who just think, well, I'll just go inside and hide out. Certain things you have to do, otherwise you're not going to make it through. The Blessed Virgin Mary is very, very specific on things that needed to be done. She says, no one outside a shelter will survive. The earth will shake as at the judgment, and fear will be great. Yes, we will listen to the prayers of your friends. Not one will perish. We will need them to publish the glory of the cross. That's just kind of a subsequent thing. The candles of blessed wax alone will give light during those horrible days of darkness. One candle alone will be enough for the duration of this time. In the homes of the wicked and the blasphemers, these candles will give no light. So again, being in a state of grace, even if you have blessed candles and you're running around and you're a rapist and you're a pervert and this or that, and you're not living a life in a state of grace, you go to light that candle, it ain't going to work. That's basically, to put it in layman's terms. As Our Lady states, everything will shake. Now, this is where we get into, remember we were talking about birth pangs, the earthquakes. If you want to know a more telltale sign of how close we are to this climactic event, pay attention to the earthquakes, because they're going to get more and more violent to the point where, and what I'm about to tell you comes from non-Catholic people who have studied this, people who've been on the inside, whistleblowers. They basically suggest that, and again, they're not Catholic, that during this period of, darkness or whatever, that we'll be locked in as Planet X is, making its orbit around us, kind of like a magnet locking in onto a refrigerator. Yet it's going to just cause us to shake. So we'll be like in an 11.0, a 12.0 earthquake, probably for about 72 hours. Okay, so you see how we're throwing everything out, you Rex, here, between the thunder and the lightning, between every devil being let loose, the whole earth, shaking in an 11.0 earthquake for 72 hours. You understand now how most people aren't going to make it through this event.
You would want to make it through that event.
Well, as you said, listen, my whole thing at the end is, as much as I'm, it seems like I'm fear-mongering, I'm not. In the end, if you're right with God, it doesn't matter what you go through. You can walk through the valleys of the shadow of death with God, and you're not going to flinch. Okay, listen, I've been there. I have, through the grace of God and through the Blessed Virgin Mary's intercession, battled my demons, if you will. I have at times seen them. I've seen things who have occupied me. It is no joke. Hell is no joke. I couldn't imagine for several experiences that I've had, 2 minutes being locked eyeball to eyeball with these certain beings. I couldn't imagine being an eternity with those things. I mean, it's enough to make the hair stand up on the back of your head, but there was still peace in my soul, if you will. On the natural level, there's obviously a kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, but I was at peace. So the bottom line is this is something to be taken very seriously, in that more and more of these devils are being released on the earth, and they're wreaking havoc, and they're like parasites. They find souls who are habitually in mortal sin, and they're taking over these bodies, and they're doing crazy, crazy stuff. And you turn on the nightly news, and it becomes more apparent. Now, Our Lady says, we're kind of continuing on, everything will shake in your house except for that piece of furniture that this blessed candle is on. You should all gather around the crucifix. And at that point, as Catholics, we say to have a picture of the Blessed Virgin Mary or a statue to enthrone your house to her again. This does not denote that Catholics worship Mary. I get so sick and tired of hearing that. We as Catholics do not worship Mary. There's no such teaching. Actually, in the early church, there were certain Catholics who were doing that, and they were excommunicated. So we venerate her. There's a big difference between veneration and the worship of Mary. So she goes on to say, during this darkness, the devils and the wicked. Now, can this wicked be interpreted as Nephilim, which I suggested to L.A. Marzulli? Quite possible. The darkness during these days of darkness, the devils and the wicked will take the most hideous shapes, and it's like highlighted, like really in bold letters. Red clouds like blood will move across the sky. The crash of thunder will shake. The earth and sinister lightning will streak across the heavens out of the season. The earth will be shaken to its very foundations. The sea will rise. Its roaring waves will spread over the continent. Now, do you understand why you need to get off of coastlines right now? And this is during the 3 days of darkness. And I've already indicated earlier, I think a comet will hit. I think we'll be hit by that Wormwood comet. That Planet X kicks in. And so this is kind of like even after that. The earth will become like a vast cemetery. The bodies of the wicked and even the just will lay over the ground, because you'll remember at some point there'll be those who are still in a state of grace, who maybe didn't take this message seriously, who are caught outside on that Thursday, who will die. So you'll walk out, and those who survive, you'll literally see it's just going to be a massive graveyard everywhere. 3/4 of the population of the globe will disappear during this 3 days, she says. Half the population of France will be destroyed. And she's constantly talking about France because that's where she was from, by the way. So two major countries that are vital to this rebirth or restoration of the Catholic Church are Russia, we already talked about, but then also from France. France is a very, very key country. And we, of course, know French Revolution started there, but ultimately France will get their act together and become Catholic again. And we could, I could be here for another hour or two getting more specific with the 3 days of darkness, but I at least wanted to get that across. And you could do your own research, 3 days of darkness, look that up, but get good Catholic sources, go to my website, if you will. And the more proximate signs, just to give you an idea, to show you how close that we are, that the Blessed Virgin Mary, talked about, again, a falling away from the Catholic faith, flouting of church laws, irreverence and immodesty. That's another harper for me, with my conversion now, Rex. I actually reach out, and I have a prostitute and escort ministry. I literally will contact girls on these major websites. I've even had talks with girls from Playboy, Maxim, hardcore pornographic actresses. Some of them will listen. You'll be surprised. You'll be very, very surprised who will listen to what I'm talking about right now in terms of, hey, you ain't got much time to get your act together. And in the sense of like, hey, listen, I'm not condemning you to hell. But if you're actively living that lifestyle, you ain't going to be ready for this stuff. So anyway, at Fatima, basically, the 3 children were shown hell in the first vision. The Blessed Virgin Mary allowed them to see hell. And she said most souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh. She warned about the immodesty to come in 1917. Take a look at how the world has changed from 1917 to 2017. Quite different in terms of how girls dress themselves, to put it. Yeah, quite different. So fallen attendance at church, lack of charity that you talked about. Is making sure you're charitable with one another. Heartlessness, indifference, divisions, contentions, all of this civil unrest, breakdown of family life. She warned of perversion of the youth. We already talked about immodest fashions. People being overly just distracted. We know from Scripture too. Our Lord said, it would be just like, during the end times, just like the days of Lot and Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah, basically. And basically, Noah got the message and he went out and warned, kind of like how I'm doing. Most people just kind of laugh it off. This guy's a jokester. He's a conspiratorial type. And then what happened? Once the rain started coming down, everyone was clawing outside of the ark. And so it's very similar with this 3 days of darkness, right? Because obviously, if we know 3/4 of the world are going to die, is the majority of the world actually going to adhere to this message? Are they actually going to try to come inside the ark, if you will, metaphorically speaking? No, they're not. They're going to laugh this off. So that's how I know. I say things, people get warned, but ultimately, do I see mass conversions? No, I don't. But there will be few, and it's worth it to me, even to find those few. So civil commotions, these are signs, proximate signs of the 3 days of darkness. Downfall of governments, confusion in high places, civil wars, revolutions. Again, revolutions specifically here in the West, generally speaking, as a chronological order of what we'll see to come. Then these earth changes you talked about, floods and droughts, as poles shift, unusual weather, increased earthquakes, famines, things along that line. And then, Marie-Julie Jaheni was very specific, even in Europe, where there'll be places of hiding, such as Brittany, a certain place in France called Brittany, where you can go to seek refuge. And again, here in the United States, I can't tell you. I mean, you want to be high up, at least 500 feet. You want to be away from coastlines. You want to be away from active volcanoes. Then you got to take into consideration, Rex. I mean, take a look at all the nuclear reactors. That's something that I think about, right here on the Ohio River running up and down. There's quite a few nuclear reactors that you don't take into consideration as things are popping off and all of these earth changes are happening. There's one Catholic mystic who said that a lot of cities and towns will die from when the earth starts cracking, if you will, and popping open. There'll be all these poisonous gases being released from below. So I don't know if you've been following the news out there in California. That's been kind of happening on their coastline. Like people are smelling these methane gases and popping up. That, in my opinion, it's due to these earth changes. You're already seeing cracked, fault lines and it's opening up, and people are going to be poisoned to death. In that fashion. There's just so much, it's really going to stretch your imagination just how bad things are about to get. And it's a result of sin in the end. I'll allow you to speak now because my throat's about to go. We got to probably wrap it up here soon.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the radiation, because I've been keeping track of the levels, and they are getting very high in San Antonio compared to what it used to be. Now, it's not like the radiation levels out here are something to be concerned about when it's only at 0.17 microsieverts. That's not a big deal. What is a big deal is what the levels were just in just a few years ago. In 2013, when I started keeping track of the levels, they were at 0.07. Now they're at 0.17, and they're slowly creeping up. I've got people reaching out to me from Kentucky and other areas saying that they're seeing spikes in the radiation. Now, I don't know what it's from. At first, I thought it was more localized, but now when I'm getting info from people in Kentucky, I'm in San Antonio right now, so when people in Kentucky are getting higher readings than they've ever seen before, they're showing me the video footage. I just saw the footage. I'm thinking to myself, what is going on? So that's interesting that you brought up the cracks in California, the methane that might be leaking, and all the fracking that's going on around the country, especially here in America. If that scenario happens to where there's some tectonic plates moving, some serious earthquakes, you've got a lot of different things that could go wrong. There's, I think, 55 different fault line, or 55 nuclear reactors close to the Madrid fault line alone, 55 of them. So imagine 55 Fukushimas going off in America. That's not good. Even one Fukushima is terrible. So I certainly think that nuclear power, whenever they started developing these reactors and the places that they put them, they certainly weren't thinking about the long term. I think that's just ridiculous what they did with that. But yeah, I mean, we've been going on for over 2 hours, and I'm sure we could go another 2 hours. I'd love to have you on the show again soon. You've got so much information. Please keep us updated. I definitely recommend everybody go to TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. Also become a YouTube member at TradCatKnight. Just go to YouTube, type in TradCatKnight. It'll pull up over 100,000 subscribers. Thanks a lot for coming on the show with us, Eric. This has been awesome.
Yeah, one last thing. I just want to point out, this will only take 2 or 3 minutes here.
Please.
With Marie-Julie Jaheni, because when I first started talking about Planet X, and I had to investigate and look into it for almost a year before I went public with it, and I said, okay, yeah, this is exactly tying in with Catholic prophecy. Marie-Julie, which we just talked about, the woman who fasted for 5 years, who had the stigmata for over 50 plus years. She warned us not only of the infiltration of the Catholic Church, and all of these just striking details of governments being overthrown, the new mass specifically. Our Lord and Lady actually warned us through her of this new mass, which was invoked in 1969 by these modernists who are claiming to be Catholic of Vatican II, which is quite startling that we have that direct warning. But then it's on Planet X. Okay, this comes from Jesus himself. Okay, she's approved, by the way, for those who are Catholic and listening and rolling their eyeballs. She is approved by the church, by her local bishop. Okay, now this was on a chapter where our Lord is talking about the preserved Jews. He goes on to say, in the eternal wisdom, I have my purpose to preserve for an immense number of Jews, because on that day of my rejoicing, I want to confound them, the ungodly eye of all those souls who will remain open, because I want them to see my power. I preserve them to see it with their own eyes. Here it comes. The radiant planet I will have coming out from the remotest parts of exile under a frightening storm of fire, right? We already talked about the fire. And under the signs of my anger, the whole sky will be crossed with bolts, similar to the ones my father thrusted upon the world when I offered myself for the ransom of my people. Now, there's some Christian researchers, such as Gil Broussard, who suggest that was an earlier passive Planet X. Because in Exodus 20, Rex, we already see that there was a 3 days of darkness, right? The 10 plagues of Egypt. Remember the frogs and the rivers of blood? We're seeing all that stuff happen all over again. And one of those chastisements, if you will, or plagues, however you want to say it, 3 days of darkness. Exodus 20. I forget specifically, but you can look it up yourself. The bottom line is, listen, Planet X is very real, as much as people want to, write it off as conspiracy. And we believe with these birth pangs that we're seeing, it's getting closer and closer. And as you see those earthquakes uptick and you see the swarms coming, you know that we're getting closer to this 3 days of darkness. So I appreciate you allowing me to come on, Rex. You can close it out now. My throat is officially done.
Well, I know you had a show before this, so I guess you've been talking now for over 4 hours. Plus, you said you had a little bit of a bug that was kind of bugging you. So you can't tell it all. I mean, you sounded great. And once again, really appreciate it. TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. TradCatKnight on YouTube. Also check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord, and we have exclusive content on leakproject.com. Question everything, ladies and gentlemen, and be the change you want to see. Let's just go with this. We'll flow. I do want to bring up to those that have a chance to listen to this podcast, if you have a chance to check out TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. Also, over 100,000 very astute, intelligent people that have subscribed to the TradCatKnight YouTube channel. And one of the cool things about Eric is not only does he specialize in prophecy and have a big impact on the Catholic community, he also has an open mind and an open heart, I feel. So I've talked to people before that oftentimes they're so religious in their beliefs that they kind of, I guess you could say, in my opinion, have a bad impact on what Christianity should be about. I mean, they kind of make somebody that is Christian oftentimes not look like they have the right intentions. And I appreciate the conversations we've had before. I know you're very passionate about your beliefs. The one video we did last time, which was several months ago, I remember in 1 hour, it just went crazy. It went viral. It got over 10,000 views in 1 hour. So a lot of people had a chance to reach that. You've got a whole bunch of people that just look specifically for TradCatKnight because you have so much good information. So let's talk about 2017, what you see coming. I mean, I'm in shock still that Trump won the presidency. I was really surprised to see that, but I kind of also look back at it now and say, wow, that makes sense. He followed the we want change approach. And if that's true and genuine, hey, we'll see. Hopefully there's going to be more jobs here at home, and it's going to make a big impact on the economy, environment, etc. So we'll see what happens. But what do you see happening in 2017? And thanks a bunch for joining us, especially due to the fact that you've got a little bit of a bug you're trying to kick right now.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate coming on, Rex. And, maybe we could do this on a more regular basis. Appreciate what you're doing. Hit that subscribe button if you're out there. I know a lot of our listeners and followers check out your information. And yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do, is cover the infiltration of the church, Catholic prophecy, end times. But as it relates to 2017, if you're talking about domestically here in this country, I was certainly surprised that Trump was quote unquote elected. I would be one of those quote unquote conspiratorial types who would fly by the whole, presidents are selected, not elected. Do I think that he is an outsider as being proposed by mainstream and alternative news? Absolutely not. But I would say with my following, it's kind of 50-50. There's traditional Catholics who are kind of cautiously optimistic, if you will, given the benefit of the doubt. Certainly he was the lesser of two evils. I mean, he was, he wasn't, Hillary Clinton, who,
but she
just
loves you.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I forget what guest I had on recently, and she said, or he said that she was the epitome of just everything evil. And so at least on the surface level, Trump is trying to paint himself like a good guy. Do I really think he's an outsider? No. I've got a guest coming on, Dave Dionisi, who's pretty good. You should get him on your show, actually. He was high up in the military at one point, high up CEO of several different financial firms, but he kind of unmasked the infiltration of the Catholic Church. But he's got some information he wants to present here in a week or so, linking Trump to Scottish Freemasonry, which I have seen already, and I've had other guests like F. William Engdahl on, very respectable. Wayne Madsen linking him to the Jewish mafia and some of how he made some money and getting into the real estate game. So, listen, folks. For me, 2017, I think they're going to stage Trump as a scapegoat, if you will, for the economic collapse, which I think we all see is coming. It's rather imminent now. And then you're going to see all these anti-Trump Soros-funded protesters come out of the woodworks, and you're just going to see a massive clash here. I mean, listen, in order for this, and we'll get into this a little bit, this Antichrist figure, Maitreya, to come onto the scene on every level, there has to be chaos, whether it's on the societal level, the economic level, the political level, just in every fashion, there has to be chaos, right? Out of chaos comes order, thus saith the world order. So my point is, they're very optimistic, with Trump getting in. And I see this on Twitter all the time. And there are going to be a lot of really disappointed people here, I think, by the end of this year. You already see Trump kind of putting into his cabinet a lot of neocons, a lot of, people connected with Goldman Sachs, and I think even the CFR. So it's like, is he the real thing? I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of sitting back, Rex, and just waiting for this whole thing to collapse. And it's first going to start with this economic collapse. Then I think it's going to get really brutal. And then probably after the fact, you'll see the globalists come out, and they'll probably say, well, hey, look, Trump tried to make it work. It didn't happen. There was an economic collapse. Guess what we need to do? Globalism is the way. I mean, there's a bunch of different paths that this could take. And I certainly don't want to go on a crusade against anyone who thinks he's the real deal. I don't lose any sleep over it, and you certainly shouldn't lose any sleep over what I have to say. I'm just saying, listen, when you follow the prophetic timeline, this isn't getting better. I mean, it's only going to get worse. And I just think he's being propped up, staged, and used to ultimately stage revolution. Which, by the way, revolution is basically the last imminent sign before the great chastisements occur on a Catholic prophetic timeline. Hopefully, later we'll get specifically into the 3 days of darkness. So, speaking abroad now, we talk domestically, and feel free to cut in, Rex. Listen, I can talk, for hours.
Well, then, let me say one thing, because I'm glad you brought that up. I have often thought that before too. And can you think of a better way to get rid of the competition? Or if Trump wasn't supposed to make it in office, well, now that he's going into office, instead of making him a martyr, well, let's do something to, I'm thinking in the globalist mindset here for a second. Let's drop the ball on the market. Let's create a stock market crash. Let's create a housing crash, a bank holiday, or something that would taint his name. And then, like you said, they could say, see, you wanted to be all nationalist again or have a national type identity, and that just doesn't work anymore. You need to be plugged in with China and Indonesia and every other country in the world, because we're all in this together. And as much as I appreciate that, and yes, we are all in this together, there still needs to be that identity. And as far as a one world government, obviously, if you're the person in control of that one world government, well, what intentions do you have? And it seems like in the past, what does great power often lead to in this world in politics? It seems like the nastiest, most wicked person that'll do anything is going to be the one that gets very successful, oftentimes, not always, in politics. So it's a dog-eat-dog world, I guess you could say. So I certainly would like to see more jobs here at home. I would certainly like to see an identity here at home again. I did just a quick presentation the other day. You take stuff that's organic versus something that's not organic. The organic product has maybe a quarter of the amount of chemicals and products, or even less than that, yet it costs 2 to 3 times as much money. And it's funny because you build products overseas, you put more chemicals in it, you store it, you ship it back, it's worse on the environment, the product isn't as good by the time you get it, and usually who makes the most profit off of that? Well, the big stockholders and the people that control those businesses. It's certainly not the people that are working for pennies on the dollar, living in squalor and having a very dilapidated slave-like lifestyle. I mean, there's got to be other opportunities. So doing stuff here at home and organic and being a part of the change and not just giving all your power to these corporations, I think is going to be a big important factor if we do want to find a way to get out of the globalist pocket. So what you said, ladies and gentlemen, listen to what Eric just said. That makes a good point. Could Donald Trump be used, the idea of nationality, making America great again, could this be used as a psyop to take that hope away from the masses? I certainly hope not, but that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like I said, for those who follow TradCatKnight, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, as Rex had mentioned. Get to TradCatKnight.blogspot.com. Again, 15-plus articles going out to you on a daily basis. The Catholic Church before Vatican II, before this infiltration, if you will, of the Catholic Church, which, when you view the social justice program of what's been coming from the Vatican since the early 60s, and you line it up with Antichrist Maitreya has to say, it's exactly the same thing. It's all about legitimate redistribution of wealth. It's all about building this new city of man, the new Tower of Babel, where there are no borders anymore. I mean, all of this stuff is very, very intricate. It's planned out decades in advance. It's not like they just came up with these agendas, just a year or two ago. And this is what the Catholic Church has been warning about, this one world socialist republic. So this is where maybe Rex and I might disagree, or, myself and a lot of your audience might disagree. For us, America, I think at a certain point is going to have kind of like a Gilligan's Island moment, like where we're just left out on the island, like to really be in silence and solitude and say, okay, like where do we go from here? Because there's going to be obviously massive civil war here. They'll probably promulgate a race war here. I mean, like every state versus each other, brother versus brother, when you read Catholic prophecy. And it's not just going to be here in America. Of course, it's going to happen in Europe. And Europe's going to get it far worse because they're going to get the whole Islamic invasion right there, which we kind of see already occurring. They want to invade Rome. They said by the year 2025, they basically want to have Rome, and so on and so forth. So for us, it's not this notion of religious liberty. This notion where every religion would have a public right. And I'm not sure, because I've done so many radio shows now, Rex, I'm not sure if we covered this point, but we're now seeing a problem with that, Rex, where we now have Satanists, right? And they're building all these Baphomet statues in Detroit and Oklahoma City and this or that. And I see Christians kind of, getting really mad about that. And I say to them, listen, under the pretext of religious liberty, they have a right to do that, right? I mean, don't Satanists have a public right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
So my point is that's the problem, right? So from a Catholic point of view, that's a heresy, by the way, in the Catholic Church, this notion of religious liberty. It's called Americanism. Same thing with separation of church and state. So what we say is, listen, it's the Catholic religion that we believe Christ founded. It's all or nothing. Like you're either with Christ or you're not with Christ. There's no like straddling the fence. So we would say that we would ultimately have to change this country, change some of the things in what have been principles by way of this country, and change them. And religious liberty would have to be one of them. I mean, it's either Christ is going to rule us, or either we're going to be a Christian country, or eventually the Catholic Church learned over time through watered down doctrine and bad puppet rulers that we've been seeing, the past 200-300 years since the French Revolution. You're ultimately going to arrive at the Antichrist. And that's literally what we're going to see. So that's one of the things you asked me, what could happen in 2017. It's quite possible that this Maitreya character, who I believe is the Antichrist, your biblical Antichrist, and I believe we talked about him maybe for like 15 minutes or so in our last talk, and later we can talk about him more in detail, how he coincides with what Catholic tradition says specifically. But that's it. I don't think, I'm not one of those persons, Rex, that says, okay, we need to return things to 1776. I would say let's return things to 32, 33 AD when Christ founded the Catholic Church through Pope St. Peter. We need to ultimately become Catholic. And this, of course, I always get this when I get into arguments with people. This doesn't mean that people don't have free will to choose against the Catholic religion. Sometimes I think, we're going to go out on some kind of crusade and burn down houses for, all Protestants and stuff like that. That's not at all the case. I'm just saying, as a public right written into the Constitution, either you're going to be a Catholic country or you're going to be a country as we are now, which is essentially a prototype for the New World Order, Rex. I mean, take a look around. I mean, we're kind of a hodgepodge mix of all kinds of people. That's exactly what they want. And so Americanism very much is kind of the model type for the New World Order. And as a matter of fact, it was the bishops, the American bishops, who brought this heresy over into Vatican II. And that's one of the reasons why, as traditional Catholics, we don't accept it, because before Vatican II, it was infallibly condemned. I know I digressed there a little bit. Why don't you jump in if you want to? Feel free to disagree with that, and then I can give you maybe a list of some things I think might happen in 2017.
Sure, and I appreciate your opinion. I certainly appreciate and value your beliefs. I myself, as you know, I'm very neutral on the subject of religion. I am agnostic, which just basically, for those that aren't necessarily familiar with the term agnostic, I just means I don't know. Do I believe in divine providence, a supreme, the ultimate being out there? Absolutely. Do I necessarily believe it's what is talked about in the Old Testament? No, I don't. And I get a lot of people that will attack me for that have certain religious beliefs. And hey, you have every right to do that. I'm just being honest. That's my belief. I don't think that I understand or am aware enough to know what God actually is? And I want to know. I absolutely want to know. I just don't feel that I do. So is that time going to happen? I certainly hope so. And if you're Catholic or if you're Lutheran or if you're atheist, I think that the most important thing, and even if you look at the teachings of Christ in the New Testament, he says, what's the most important commandment? Well, to treat your neighbor like yourself. And if somebody isn't at that spiritual level yet, to condemn them, I think, is the opposite of what Christ would want to do. But, he also says, like you brought up, a lot of you think I come here in peace, but I actually come here with a sword, and it's going to be mother against daughter, father against son. And then there's the path that's talked about, the less taken path. And I certainly think that there is, to get to that higher level, is certainly a less taken path. So I'm looking for it, man.
Yeah, narrow road. And hey, listen, most people think, even with my own background, Rex, listen, I fell away from the church several times and became a very immoral person. Got addicted to sex and pornography. A lot of you might know my story already. So I didn't always believe everything the church believed. So what we would say is, on the objective level, we would disagree with you, but subjectively, we cannot condemn anyone. That's not our position. The church infallibly teaches that. And so, all we can do is continue to show from what the church has always said, people's errors in there. And I think over time, when people really process it and sit down and think about it, it makes sense. I mean, even when I just pointed up that whole argument against religious liberty, I've had a lot of people who didn't identify as Catholic say, yeah, you're right. It does make sense, because that's really the reality. I mean, as Christians, we believe that Christ is not only King of heaven, but he should be king here down on earth. Unfortunately, we know who truly rules down here. We know Lucifer rules down here. But the bottom line is we're trying to actively work for a restoration of a Catholic society. And that's basically what the consensus of Catholic prophecy is we're going to go through a great storm period, a tribulation. Many of you know it as the Great Tribulation. Then after this will be a period of peace, a shorter period of peace. I hope to get into that in a little bit. Everyone's journey is different. And many of the Catholic saints first started out as agnostics or pagans, or living very immorally, such as St. Francis or St. Augustine. How about St. Justin the Martyr? I mean, as far as I can recall, he was a pagan beforehand. So my point is that some of the greatest minds in the church didn't start out so hot, I guess if you want to say. So the bottom line is we're here. We have to have open arms. We disagree on certain points, and we continue to pray. So in terms of 2017, some things we could be looking for, Rex, is obviously, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, with Planet X inbound, we're going to see a lot of serious Earth changes. I think we're going to begin to see more 7.0, 8.0 earthquake swarms that we're already beginning to see, just in these past few weeks. Solomon Islands, we had that swarm out there in the Cali, Nevada area, then out in the San Andreas area. I mean, mainstream media is putting the warning out there. That's how serious it is. When the mainstream media is tooting their horn on that, something must be really up. Now, from a Catholic point of view, I think it's quite possible. Again, we talked about this before. There's a growing number of us who hold that Francis is an anti-pope. He's not even the true pope, and that he will give way to this false prophet character. Benedict XVI, in my opinion, is the true pope. He's the long-awaited pope from Catholic prophecy to flee Rome after the economic collapse, after all these civil unrest, and essentially Italy's going to have a red revolution, Catholic prophecy says. And you'll see Benedict XVI flee through Europe. And then that's when the entire Catholic world, and really people who are not even Catholic, they're going to say, where is the Catholic Church? Because at that point, this false prophet nut job who shows up, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to recognize him as a pope. He's not even going to want to be called pope. And so this is where we have kind of the underground church being established. And this is what the early Catholic Church fathers warned of in the end times, that the vicar of Christ would be driven from Rome, and Rome would return to its ancient paganism, just like it did in the early times before Catholicism was established as the religion of Rome and ultimately set up shop there. So Pope to flee Rome is a possibility. Then we have this Antichrist Maitreya figure who might arrive after the economic collapse. That's the big thing we all got to really be waiting for, is this economic collapse, Rex. I mean, this is going to be pivotal, because once this occurs, we of course know the unrest to follow after that. But then it's a more imminent sign of Antichrist Maitreya showing up onto the scene in what's called a day of declaration, where he's going to visibly be seen via international television. Again, this coincides with Scripture, where he'll be seen throughout the whole world in 1 hour, basically. And he's going to, quote unquote, telepathically speak to everyone in their own language and basically start promoting what we need to do and evolve as humanity, if you will. So, as Catholics, this isn't a good thing. We're not trying to evolve. These principles behind the New Age have been condemned by the church. And so I think we could see that. I truly do. And the economic collapse is going to be a major indicator of this. I'll get to a few more here if you want to jump in.
It seems as if many people have devolved, not evolved. I certainly think that most people are at a completely different level mentally. If you look at people used to read a lot more. They used to learn different languages. They learned how to actually build things. And now it's so compartmentalized. We all have cell phones, but where are all these cell phones made? They're all made in China, or at least for the most part, they're made in China. I don't know how to build a cell phone. I had a tough time fixing my Samsung phone. I had to take it apart and basically shave off the power button because it got stuck, and then I put it back together. And I just think that, and where am I going with this? Technologies and stuff like that. I wonder if they're going to use the technology as a way to do this Antichrist type setup you're talking about, to kind of get into people's minds, use a certain satellite setup, or do you think this is going to be an actual the fallen angel? What is the Antichrist to you? Because I'm looking up this character that you're talking about, that we've talked about before. I can't find a whole lot about him. I mean, I would think that the Antichrist would have tons of money, have connections to all the corporations, where he could literally just walk into GE or to Lockheed Martin or something like that and say, okay, let me see your parameters. Let me look at your schematics.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. But I think it's safe to say, he's in hiding until his time comes, until he arrives onto the scene. He has been somewhat visible. He says he does these interviews here and there. For those who are looking for his actual website, you can go to Google and type in Share International Maitreya and get to his website. I mean, you could spend hours there. I mean, I've been following this guy Rex now for 5 years. And again, from my knowledge and what the early church fathers say, when I'm going to look for an Antichrist figure, I can always rule out someone based upon what the consensus of the common opinion was of the early church fathers. And with this guy, you can't rule out anything. And I'm going to get into some of these characteristics here in a minute. But I specifically want to answer your question as it relates to the technology side of things. And we're headed towards a cashless society. I mean, I bring on economic guests on a monthly basis, whether it's Greg Manarino, whether it's Gerald Celente, or V, the Gorilla Economist. I mean, we got them all on. They're all saying the economic collapse is imminent, but they all kind of agree that eventually we're going digital with the economy, and that it's not conspiratorial to think that these elites will have us hooked up to a supercomputer, which, as far as I can read, I can't recall if it's in Switzerland or somewhere in Europe, but it's literally called the Beast. And so the bottom line is, I talked about this briefly last time. When we look at what the early church fathers said about what the actual mark of the beast is, it's the actual Luciferian initiation in order to even get that chip. David Spangler, who was a high-ranking person in the UN, I forget his actual title, but he basically said no one will be able to enter into the New World Order and the New Age without this Luciferian initiation. So St. Hildegard called this mark of the beast the counterfeit baptism. So what you're going to see is, I just covered this. I've been covering